Mason Reed learned the hard way that no good deed goes unpunished. One night, driving the company's ice-cold CEO home from a party, he made a choice that should have been simple: help a vulnerable woman get home safe, then return to his son. But that single act of decency became a weapon in the hands of people who saw ambition where there was only kindness, scandal where there was only humanity. By Monday morning, his entire life was on fire, and the only person who could save him was the same woman whose life he'd protected. If you want to see how one father's integrity survived a corporate war designed to destroy him, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Mason's story travels. The fluorescent lights of Apex Logistics' parking garage hummed like dying insects at 11:47 p.m., casting sickly shadows across rows of company vehicles. Mason Reed sat in the driver's seat of the executive sedan, his phone balanced on one knee, texting his babysitter with the careful precision of a single father who'd learned that every detail mattered. Running late. Probably another hour. Can you stay? The response came immediately. No problem, Mr. Reed. Caleb's been asleep since 8:30. Take your time. Mason exhaled slowly, allowing himself exactly 3 seconds of relief before the guilt crept back in. Caleb was 6 years old. 6 years of Mason figuring out how to be both parents at once, how to pack lunches that other kids wouldn't mock, how to explain why mommy left without making his son feel like the reason. Every extra shift Mason took meant Caleb spent more time with Mrs. Patterson from 3B, a kind woman who loved his boy but wasn't his father. But extra shifts also meant the dinosaur sneakers Caleb had been eyeing at Target. They meant the field trip deposit due Friday. They meant the difference between making it and drowning. The elevator chimed across the garage, and Mason straightened instinctively. Nobody important used the employee parking level at this hour, which meant this wasn't a regular pickup. The corporate anniversary party upstairs had been going strong since 6 p.m., a glittering affair for executives and major clients that regular employees like Mason only glimpsed through the logistics of making it happen. He'd been scheduled to leave at 9, but then dispatch called with the request that made his stomach drop. Need you for a VIP pickup. CEO. Handle it personally. Victoria Hale. Even her name carried weight inside Apex Logistics. Mason had worked for the company for 4 years and had seen her exactly twice, both times from a distance, both times convinced she was less a person and more a force of nature compressed into designer suits and 4-inch heels. She'd built Apex from a regional shipping company into a national powerhouse through what the business magazines called ruthless efficiency, and what the break room called being scary as hell. The elevator doors opened, and Mason's breath caught. Victoria Hale stumbled out supported between 2 other executives Mason vaguely recognized from company emails. Her usually immaculate dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her emerald evening gown was twisted awkwardly, and even from 30 feet away, Mason could see the wobble in her step that meant seriously drunk. Where's her car? The man on her left, gray suit, corporate tan, the kind of face that smiled through quarterly layoffs, glanced around impatiently. Mason stepped out of the sedan and raised one hand. Right here, sir. I'm her driver tonight. The executives exchanged a look Mason couldn't quite read. The woman on Victoria's right, blonde and sharp-featured, gave him an assessing glance that felt like being inventoried. You're the regular driver pool? Yes, ma'am. Mason Reed. Dispatch sent me for... Whatever. The gray suit interrupted, already steering Victoria toward the car. Just get her home without incident. She's had a rough night. Mason moved quickly to open the rear passenger door, positioning himself to help guide Victoria inside without making it awkward. Up close, she looked nothing like the commanding figure from company videos. Her eye makeup was smudged, her lipstick worn away, and her eyes, when they briefly focused on Mason, held something that looked uncomfortably like pain. Easy, Mason said quietly as they maneuvered her into the seat. Watch your head. Victoria mumbled something unintelligible and immediately curled sideways against the leather. Her shoes, expensive heels that probably cost more than Mason's rent, dangling forgotten from her feet. You have her address? The blonde executive was already stepping back, clearly eager to return to the party. Dispatch sent it. Mason carefully buckled Victoria in, adjusting the belt so it wouldn't dig into her shoulder. I'll make sure she gets home safe. The gray suit gave him another unreadable look. I'm sure you will. Something in his tone made Mason's skin prickle, but before he could analyze it, both executives were walking back toward the elevator without a backward glance. Mason stood there for a moment, watching them disappear, fighting the feeling that he'd just been set up for something he didn't understand. Then Victoria made a soft sound of distress from the back seat, and his instincts as a father overrode everything else. He slipped into the driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror to keep an eye on her. Ms. Hale, can you hear me? A small groan. Don't want to talk. Understood. We're heading to your place now. Should take about 20 minutes. Mason pulled out of the garage carefully, hyper-aware of his passenger's condition. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. Downtown Seattle's usual traffic, reduced to the occasional cab and late-night delivery truck. The address dispatch had given him was in Madison Park, the kind of neighborhood where Mason couldn't afford to window shop, let alone live. 5 minutes into the drive, Victoria stirred. Stop. Mason's foot moved toward the brake. Are you feeling sick? I can pull over. Not sick. Her voice was thick but clearer than before. Just everything's wrong. Mason kept his eyes on the road, but his attention split between driving and the woman falling apart in his back seat. Do you want me to take you somewhere else? A hospital or no hospitals? Victoria sat up slightly and Mason caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were clearer now, focused on him with an intensity that made him nervous. What's your name? Mason Reed, ma'am. How long have you worked for me, Mason Reed? The phrasing was strange, worked for her, not for Apex, but Mason answered honestly. 4 years this October. 4 years? Victoria laughed, a bitter sound. 4 years, and I don't know your name. Don't know anyone's name unless they're director level or above. She pressed her forehead against the window. Tonight I found out why that matters. Mason kept his mouth shut. Whatever was happening here was way above his pay grade, and he'd learned early in life that sometimes the smartest thing you could do was let powerful people's pain pass through you without trying to fix it. You married, Mason Reed? The question caught him off guard. No, ma'am. Single father. How old's your kid? 6. His name's Caleb. Victoria was quiet for so long that Mason thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, someone told me tonight that I'm cold, that I turned into the kind of person people fear instead of respect, that I've built an empire but lost everything that matters. Her voice cracked slightly. They weren't wrong. Mason's grip tightened on the steering wheel. This conversation was dangerous territory, the kind where anything he said could be used against him later when she sobered up and remembered the driver who'd heard her vulnerable. But his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent when someone was clearly hurting. For what it's worth, he said carefully, Apex treats its people better than most companies I've seen. The benefits package is solid. The pay's fair. You built something that gives families like mine stability. Families like yours? Victoria's reflection studied him. What does that mean? Mason hesitated, then figured honesty was safer than trying to guess what she wanted to hear. Single dad trying to raise a good kid on a driver's salary. It's not fancy, but Apex makes it possible. The health insurance alone. He stopped himself. Sorry, you probably don't need to hear about insurance premiums right now. No. Victoria sat up straighter, and some of the commanding presence started filtering back into her voice despite the alcohol. I do need to hear it. Because tonight someone accused me of being so disconnected from my own company that I wouldn't know if my employees were struggling. Said I treat people like resources instead of human beings. She wiped at her eyes roughly. Were they right, Mason? Am I that person? Every instinct Mason had screamed at him to deflect, to give the safe answer. But there was something in Victoria's voice, genuine need maybe, or the kind of raw honesty that only comes when someone's defenses are completely down. That made him answer truthfully. I think, he said slowly, that running a big company means you can't know everyone. But the policies you set determine whether people like me can give our kids a decent life, and by that measure, you're doing something right. Victoria made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Diplomatic. You'd be good in corporate. No thanks. Mason took the exit toward Madison Park. I like seeing my son occasionally. Smart man. Victoria slumped against the seat again. Smarter than me. The neighborhood transformed as they drove deeper into Madison Park. The apartments and townhouses gave way to standalone homes with manicured lawns and gates. Mason pulled up to an address that made his chest tight. A modern architectural masterpiece of glass and steel, probably 4,000 square feet minimum, with a view of Lake Washington that must have cost millions. This was Victoria Hale's world, a universe away from Mason's cramped two-bedroom apartment where Caleb's toys perpetually covered the living room floor. He parked in the circular driveway and turned to check on his passenger. Victoria had gone still, her eyes closed, breathing deep and even. Passed out or actually asleep, Mason couldn't tell. "Ms. Hale?" he tried. "We're at your home." Nothing. Mason sat there for a moment, weighing options. He could call for backup, maybe reach out to the executives from earlier, or contact building security if this place had it. The safe play, the covering his ass play, was to get someone else involved immediately. But the image of Victoria stumbling, vulnerable, supported between two people who dumped her with him and disappeared back to their party, stuck in his mind. And something else. The way she'd been crying about being cold, about losing connection, about building an empire at the cost of everything else. Mason thought about Caleb, about the nights his son woke up from nightmares calling for a mother who'd decided being a parent was too hard. He thought about being alone and scared and needing someone, anyone, to just give a damn. "All right," he said it quietly to himself more than anyone else. "Let's get you inside." Mason got out and opened the rear passenger door carefully. Victoria stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Her shoes had fallen to the floor and Mason grabbed them before bending down to assess the situation. "Miss Hale?" He tried one more time, gently shaking her shoulder. "I need you to wake up for just a minute." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "What?" "We're at your house. Can you walk if I help you?" Victoria tried to sit up, nearly toppled sideways, and grabbed Mason's arm with surprising strength. "Room's spinning." "I've got you." Mason braced himself and helped her out of the car, one arm around her waist, letting her lean her full weight against him. She was taller than he'd expected, probably 5'9" without the heels, and unsteady enough that each step required careful coordination. They made it to the front door in a shuffling dance that would have been comical if Mason wasn't hyper-aware of how wrong this could look to anyone watching. Victoria fumbled in her small purse with one hand while clinging to Mason with the other, finally producing a keycard. There's a panel." She gestured vaguely at the doorframe. Mason spotted the discreet security pad and positioned Victoria so she could reach it while he kept her upright. She pressed the card against it with exaggerated concentration, and the door clicked open. The interior was exactly what Mason expected. Open floor plan, modern furniture in blacks and whites and grays, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, art that probably cost more than his car. Everything precise, expensive, and utterly impersonal, like a hotel suite designed by someone who'd forgotten what homes were supposed to feel like. "Which way to your bedroom?" Mason asked. Victoria pointed vaguely toward a floating staircase. "Up?" "Of course." Mason adjusted his grip and started the careful process of getting her up the stairs, each step a minor negotiation between gravity and willpower. Victoria tried to help, really tried, but her coordination was shot, and Mason ended up basically carrying her the last few steps. The master bedroom was enormous. A king bed positioned to face the windows, more abstract art, a sitting area with chairs that looked like they'd never been used. Mason headed straight for the bed, pulling back the duvet with one hand while keeping Victoria steady with the other. "Okay," he said gently. "Let's get you lying down." He helped her onto the bed, and Victoria immediately curled onto her side, still wearing the evening gown. Mason hesitated, then grabbed the duvet and pulled it over her. His experience with Caleb's occasional fevers had taught him the basics of making someone comfortable. "Water," Victoria mumbled. "Need water." Mason glanced around and spotted an ensuite bathroom through an open door. He found a glass, filled it, and brought it back along with a hand towel. He set both on the nightstand within easy reach. "There's water right here if you need it," he said, "and a towel in case, well, just in case." Victoria's eyes opened slightly, struggling to focus on him. "You're still here." "Yeah." Mason backed toward the door. I'm going to head out now. Make sure you drink that water before you sleep, okay? No. The word came out sharp, almost panicked. Victoria's hand shot out, grabbing at air. Don't leave. Please don't leave. Mason froze. Every alarm bell in his head was ringing. This was exactly the kind of situation that could be twisted, misinterpreted, weaponized. He should walk out right now, text dispatch that delivery was complete, and go home to his kid. But Victoria's voice had cracked on that please, and there was something in it that sounded less like a drunk CEO making poor decisions and more like a human being who was genuinely afraid of being alone. Mason thought about his son, about the nights Caleb begged him not to leave the room until he fell asleep, about how sometimes people just needed someone to stay, not to fix anything, just to be there. Okay, Mason heard himself say. I'll stay for a bit, but I'm going to be downstairs, all right? Just until you fall asleep properly. Victoria's eyes were already closing again. Thank you. Mason stood there for another moment, watching her breathing even out, then quietly left the bedroom. He walked back downstairs, his mind racing through the logistics. He'd stay an hour, maybe 2 at most, long enough to make sure she was stable, that she didn't need medical attention. Then he'd leave, lock the door behind him, and this would just be a weird story he'd never tell anyone. The living room had a leather couch that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Mason sat down carefully, already pulling out his phone to text Mrs. Patterson. Going to be really late. Emergency with work. So sorry. It's fine. Caleb's good. I brought my book. Take care of yourself, honey. Mason set his phone on the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This penthouse probably had 15 rooms and looked like nobody had ever actually lived in it. No photos, no clutter, no evidence of hobbies or personality or life beyond work. Victoria Hale had everything and nothing all at once. He understood why she'd been crying in the car. The city lights reflected off the lake outside, and Mason let his eyes close for just a moment. 1 hour. He'd give it 1 hour, then head home to the life that actually mattered. The cramped apartment that smelled like his kids' sneakers and leftover pizza, where dinosaur drawings covered the fridge and every surface held evidence that someone was loved. He didn't realize he had dozed off until his phone buzzed sometime later. Mason jerked awake, disoriented, his neck stiff from the angle. The phone screen said 2:43 a.m. Shit. He'd been here for nearly 3 hours. Mason stood quickly, his heart hammering. He needed to check on Victoria, make sure she was still breathing, then get out of here before this became even more complicated. He took the stairs 2 at a time, moving as quietly as he could. The bedroom door was still open, and he could hear steady breathing from inside. Mason peeked in just long enough to confirm Victoria was asleep, still on her side, exactly where he'd left her. Good enough. He headed back downstairs, looking for his keys, when he noticed the state of the living room. In his tired haze earlier, he'd set down his jacket on the couch. His shoes were by the door. There was a water glass on the coffee table that he'd gotten for himself. It looked like someone had spent time here, like he'd been comfortable. Mason's law enforcement training from before Caleb was born, back when he'd thought he might be a cop, kicked in. Details mattered. Perception was everything. He grabbed his jacket, put on his shoes, took the water glass to the kitchen and washed it thoroughly. Then he did a quick sweep to make sure he hadn't left anything else. On his way to the door, he spotted Victoria's purse on the entry table, her phone half visible. It would be so easy to take a photo, prove he'd been here, protect himself. But Mason had learned long ago that the only protection that mattered was being able to look your kid in the eye and tell the truth. He didn't take the photo. Instead, he found a notepad by the kitchen phone. Did people still have house phones? And wrote quickly. Ms. Hale, made sure you got home safe. Left water and towel upstairs. Lock your door. Mason Reed. He left the note where she'd see it, made sure the door would lock behind him, and stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and second-guessing. Had he done the right thing? Had he just created a massive problem for himself? Would she even remember asking him to stay? Mason pulled into his apartment complex's parking lot as the sky started lightening. Mrs. Patterson's car was still there, and guilt hit him fresh. He'd kept her here all night. She met him at the door with a gentle smile. Long night? You have no idea. Mason pulled out his wallet. "Let me pay you for the extra." "Oh, hush!" Mrs. Patterson waved him off. "That boy of yours is an angel. Go get some sleep. You look exhausted." After she left, Mason stood in his living room, surrounded by Caleb's toys and drawings and the normal chaos of their life, and felt something unclench in his chest. This was real. This mattered. Whatever happened with tonight, this was the world he belonged to. He checked on Caleb, fast asleep, one arm wrapped around his stuffed brachiosaurus, then collapsed into his own bed, still fully clothed. He had no idea that in less than 48 hours, that decision to stay would become the center of a storm that would threaten to destroy everything he'd built for his son. Sunday passed in the beautiful normalcy of single parenthood. Mason made chocolate chip pancakes that were slightly burned, took Caleb to the park, helped him build an elaborate dinosaur habitat in the living room, and tried not to think about Friday night. By Sunday evening, as he read Caleb his bedtime story for the second time, Mason had almost convinced himself that the whole thing would just fade into one of those weird work stories he'd never tell. Monday morning shattered that illusion. Mason dropped Caleb at school, Mrs. Chen's first-grade class, where his boy was currently obsessed with both dinosaurs and learning to read, and drove to Apex's main hub. He parked in his usual spot and headed inside, already thinking about the day's route schedule. The moment he walked through the employee entrance, something was wrong. 3 drivers stood by the coffee station, and all 3 stopped talking the instant they saw him. One, Derek, a guy Mason had worked with for 2 years, met his eyes for half a second, then looked away fast. Mason's stomach dropped, but he kept walking. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe they were just... Reed. His supervisor, Tom Phillips, appeared from the dispatch office. His expression was carefully neutral. "Need you in my office. Now." The walk to Tom's office felt like a mile. Other employees watched as he passed, some openly staring, others whispering behind hands. Mason's heart was hammering, but he kept his face blank. Whatever this was, showing fear would only make it worse. Tom closed the door behind them and sat down heavily. He was a decent guy, early 50s, ex-military, with 3 kids of his own. Right now, he looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "What happened Friday night?" Tom asked without preamble. Mason's mind raced. "I drove Ms. Hale home from the company party. Made sure she got inside safely. That's it." Tom pulled out his phone and turned it toward Mason. "Is that you?" The photo was dark, grainy, clearly taken from someone's phone camera. But it was unmistakably Mason, supporting Victoria Hale as they walked toward her front door. The angle made it look intimate, like he had his arm around her, like she was leaning into him, like this was something far more personal than a drunk boss being helped by her driver. "That's me helping her walk," Mason said steadily. "She was intoxicated and couldn't make it to the door on her own. I made sure she got inside safe, then I left. That's the whole story." Tom nodded slowly, but his expression didn't improve. "Mason, I want to believe you. Your record here is spotless, but this photo's been circulating since Saturday night and people are talking." "Talking about what?" Mason could hear his voice getting tight. "I did my job. I drove the CEO home safely. There's more." Tom pulled up another image, a screenshot of a group chat Mason didn't recognize. Multiple messages, all variations on a theme. Reed trying to get ahead the fast way, and always knew he was ambitious and poor bastard. Hale's going to bury him when she sobers up. "These are from the Executive Communications channel," Tom said quietly. "Somehow that photo got shared there and now it's all over the company. HR's getting pressure to investigate. There's talk that you took advantage of the situation." Mason's vision actually blurred for a second. "Took advantage?" "Tom, I helped her walk to the door, that's it." "I believe you." Tom held up one hand. "But I'm not the one you need to convince. HR wants you in their office at 9. They're treating this as a formal complaint." "Complaint from who?" Mason's voice rose despite his best efforts. "Ms. Hale? Has she accused me of something?" "No." Tom looked genuinely pained. "Ms. Hale hasn't said anything. But several executives have filed concerns based on inappropriate conduct and potential harassment of a superior in a vulnerable state. Their words, not mine." Mason felt the floor tilt. This is insane. I know. Tom stood up. Listen to me. Get yourself a good answer ready. Be specific about times, about what you did and didn't do. Don't let them twist your words. And Mason? He waited until Mason met his eyes. Whatever happens, remember you've got a kid counting on you. Don't let your temper make this worse. The HR meeting was a nightmare. Two representatives Mason had never met, both wearing expressions of professional concern that felt rehearsed. They asked him to detail the entire evening, where he'd picked Victoria up, who'd been there, what condition she was in, every word of their conversation, every action he'd taken. Mason told the truth, straight and simple. He helped her walk to the door. He made sure she got inside. He stayed for a short time at her request because she'd been upset. He left a note. He locked the door. He went home. Did you enter her bedroom? The female HR rep asked. I helped her get to bed because she couldn't make it on her own. I didn't undress her. I didn't touch her beyond helping her walk. I covered her with a blanket and left water on the nightstand. Then I went downstairs and stayed on the couch until I was sure she was stable. How long did you remain in Ms. Hale's residence? Mason checked his phone for the timestamps. About 3 hours. I dozed off accidentally. The two reps exchanged a glance that made Mason's blood run cold. 3 hours is a significant amount of time, the male rep said carefully. Were you aware that remaining in a superior's home without explicit consent could be considered trespassing? She asked me to stay. Mason's jaw was tight enough to hurt. She said, please don't leave. I stayed downstairs. I didn't go through her things. I didn't do anything except make sure she was safe. Unfortunately, the female rep said with utterly false sympathy, we only have your word for that. And given the circumstances, a male employee alone with an incapacitated female executive, the appearance is problematic. The appearance? Mason leaned forward. The appearance is that I did exactly what any decent person would do. I made sure someone who was vulnerable got home safe. That's it. We understand you believe that. The male rep's tone had shifted to something that made Mason's stomach churn. However, pending a full investigation, we're placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. You'll need to surrender your company vehicle keys and ID badge. The words hit like physical blows. You're suspending me. It's standard procedure for investigations of this nature. What nature? Mason's voice was rising, and he fought to control it. What exactly am I being investigated for? Potential harassment, inappropriate conduct with a superior, and misuse of company property. The female rep was already typing on her tablet. You'll be contacted when the investigation concludes. How long will that take? These things typically take 3 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 6 weeks without income. 6 weeks trying to explain to Caleb why Daddy wasn't going to work. 6 weeks of bills piling up and savings evaporating, and Mason stood up, his hand shaking. I did nothing wrong. We're not saying you did. The male rep's smile was professional and meaningless. We're simply following protocol. Mason handed over his keys and badge, feeling like he was surrendering pieces of his identity. In the hallway outside HR, he pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed texts, all from other drivers, all asking what the hell was going on. One text stood out, from Derek. Dude, there's a video now. I'm sorry. Mason's hands went numb. He opened the link Derek had sent. The video was short, maybe 15 seconds, and clearly edited. It showed Mason entering Victoria's building, the timestamp visible in the corner. Then a jump cut to 3 hours later, Mason leaving. No context, no explanation, just the suggestion that he'd been inside for 3 hours doing what? The implication was obvious and disgusting. The video had 847 views already. In the company chat, Mason made it to his car before his knees gave out. He sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He'd done everything right. He'd been careful. He'd been kind. And now his entire life was falling apart because someone had decided that kindness looked like opportunity. His phone rang. Mrs. Patterson. Mason, honey, are you okay? I just got a call from Caleb's school. He's fine, but apparently some of the other parents are... There's been talk about you, about some incident at work. Mason closed his eyes. I'll be right there. He picked Caleb up from school early, ignoring the looks from other parents, ignoring the principal's carefully worded questions about ensuring the situation was resolved. Caleb, blessedly oblivious, chattered about his day while Mason drove home on autopilot. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Mason sat alone in his living room and did what he'd been avoiding. He opened the company chat and read through the messages. The vitriol was breathtaking. People he'd worked with for years were calling him a predator. Someone had created a meme using his ID badge photo with the caption, "How to get promoted the Mason Reed way." Multiple threads speculated about what really happened in Victoria's penthouse, each version more lurid than the last. And through it all, not a single message from Victoria Hale herself. No statement, no clarification, nothing. Mason's phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. "You're done. Should have known your place." He set the phone down carefully, walked to Caleb's room, and stood in the doorway watching his son sleep. Caleb's face was peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that his father's world was burning down around them. "I'm sorry, buddy," Mason whispered. "I'm so sorry." But he wasn't sorry for helping Victoria. Despite everything, despite the nightmare his life had become, he couldn't regret making sure a vulnerable person got home safe. That was who he was. That was who he needed to be for Caleb, even if it cost him everything else. Tuesday morning brought a formal letter from HR, delivered via email at 6:47 a.m. The investigation would proceed. He was to have no contact with Victoria Hale or any executives. Any attempt to discuss the case with other employees would result in immediate termination. Mason was effectively erased. Wednesday, his bank account confirmed his worst fears. His direct deposit had been stopped. No paycheck, no explanation, just empty space where his income should have been. Thursday, Mrs. Patterson knocked on his door with tears in her eyes. Some of the other tenants in the building had been asking about him. The rumor mill had spread beyond Apex. By Friday, exactly 1 week after the night that should have been routine, Mason Reed sat in his apartment trying to figure out how to explain to his 6-year-old son that Daddy might not be able to afford their home much longer. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Mason Reed?" A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "Speaking." "This is Jennifer Walsh from Apex HR. We need you to come in Monday morning at 8 a.m. for a final interview regarding your case. Ms. Hale will be present." Mason's grip tightened on the phone. "Will I finally get to hear what I'm actually accused of?" "All relevant information will be discussed Monday. Please be on time." She hung up before he could respond. Mason sat there in the darkness of his living room, surrounded by his son's toys and drawings and the remnants of the life he'd built, and made a decision. Whatever happened Monday, whatever they threw at him, he would tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Because that was all he had left to give. And somewhere across the city, in a glass and steel penthouse overlooking a lake Mason couldn't afford to live near, Victoria Hale was reviewing security footage for the 14th time. Watching a man she'd barely known carry her home with the kind of gentle care she hadn't experienced in years. Watching him stay, not because he had to, but because he'd promised. And slowly, with the methodical precision that had built an empire, Victoria Hale began to get angry. Not at Mason Reed, but at every single person who had decided to destroy him for showing basic human decency in a world that had forgotten what decency looked like. The weekend stretched before Mason like a prison sentence. Saturday morning, he made pancakes again, Caleb's favorite, but couldn't taste them. His son sat across from him at their small kitchen table, drowning his breakfast in syrup while explaining an elaborate theory about whether a T-Rex could beat a Spinosaurus in a fight. "Daddy, you're not listening." Caleb's voice carried that particular note of 6-year-old disappointment that cut deeper than any corporate investigation. "I'm listening, buddy. T-Rex has the stronger bite force, right?" "Yeah, but Spinosaurus has the claws and it can swim," Caleb demonstrated with his fork and knife, complete with sound effects. "So if they fight near water, Spinosaurus wins." Mason forced a smile. "Smart thinking. You've really been paying attention in those dinosaur books." "Mrs. Chen says I'm the best reader in the class now." Pride radiated from Caleb's face. "She says if I keep practicing, I can move up to the chapter books after winter break." "That's amazing, Caleb. I'm so proud of you." "Are you sick, Daddy?" Caleb tilted his head, studying Mason with the unnerving perception that kids sometimes have. You look sad. Mason's throat tightened. Just tired from work. Nothing for you to worry about. Is work being mean to you? The question hit like a punch. Mason set down his coffee carefully. What makes you ask that? Caleb shrugged, suddenly fascinated by his plate. Tommy's mom picked him up early on Monday. I heard her tell Mrs. Chen that Tommy's dad said you were in trouble at work. Are you in trouble? Mason closed his eyes briefly. Of course, the rumors had reached the school. Of course, other parents were talking. Of course, his 6-year-old had to hear his father discussed like a criminal. Sometimes, Mason said carefully, grown-ups don't understand things right away. They hear part of a story and think they know the whole thing, but they don't. So yeah, there's some confusion at work right now, but it's going to get sorted out. I promise. Did you do something bad? No, buddy. I helped someone who needed help, that's all. Caleb considered this with the seriousness of a judge. Then why are people mad? Because Mason struggled to explain corporate politics to a first grader. Because sometimes people see what they want to see instead of what's really there. But the truth always comes out eventually. We just have to be patient. Okay. Caleb returned to his pancakes, apparently satisfied. Can we go to the park after breakfast? I want to practice on the monkey bars. Yeah. Mason felt something unclench slightly in his chest. Yeah, we can do that. They spent the day at the park, and Mason tried to focus on the simple joy of watching his son play. Caleb had finally mastered the monkey bars last month, and now he crossed them repeatedly, shouting, Daddy, watch this, with each successful trip. Other parents were there too, and Mason felt their eyes on him, felt the subtle shift as mothers guided their children to different areas of the playground. One dad, someone Mason vaguely recognized from school pickup, actually pulled his daughter away when she started playing near Caleb. The message was clear. Mason Reed was contaminated, and contamination spread. Mason's hands curled into fists in his jacket pockets, but he kept his expression neutral. Getting angry, making a scene, would only confirm whatever ugly story people had decided to believe. So he smiled at his son, applauded his achievements, and pretended he didn't notice the social exile happening around him. That night, after Caleb fell asleep, Mason sat at his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding. He opened his bank account and ran the numbers. Savings, $3,847. Rent, $1,400. Due in 12 days. Utilities, roughly $200. Groceries, $300 minimum for the month. Car insurance, $180. Caleb's after-school program, $400. Total, $2,480, leaving him with $1,367 for anything else that came up. 1 month. He could survive 1 month on savings if nothing unexpected happened. But if the investigation dragged longer, if HR decided to terminate him, if he couldn't find another job with this shadow hanging over him, Mason's chest tightened. He'd fought so hard to build stability for Caleb, to create a life where his son never felt the chaos and uncertainty that had defined Mason's own childhood. And now that stability was crumbling because he'd helped someone get home safe. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom. Heard your meeting with HR Monday. Want to go over your statement before? I can help you prepare. Mason stared at the message for a long moment. Tom was a good guy, genuinely trying to help. But preparing a statement felt like admitting there was a case to answer, like he needed to defend basic human decency. Thanks. I'll think about it, Mason typed back. He didn't sleep much that night. Sunday brought a different kind of torture. Mason took Caleb to the grocery store, a routine task that suddenly felt like running a gauntlet. At the checkout, the clerk, someone Mason had seen dozens of times, had exchanged casual pleasantries with, avoided eye contact while scanning his items. The woman behind him in line actually switched lanes when she recognized him. Daddy, why did that lady move? Caleb asked, too loud in the quiet store. Maybe she was in a hurry, buddy. In the parking lot, loading groceries into his car, Mason's phone rang. Unknown number again. His stomach dropped, but he answered. Mr. Reed, this is Marcus Benton from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story on workplace harassment allegations at major Seattle companies, and your name has come up in connection with an incident at Apex Logistics. Would you be willing to comment?" Mason's blood went cold. "How did you get my number?" "Public records." "Look, Mr. Reed, your side of the story deserves to be heard. We've been told that you allegedly—" Mason hung up. His hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped the phone. The news. This had made it to the actual news. How was that possible? How had a simple act of helping someone get home safe turned into a media story? Another call, different number. Mason declined it, then a text from the same number. "This story is running with or without your comment. Better to have your voice included." Mason blocked the number, then another that immediately tried calling. His phone became a weapon in his pocket for the rest of the day, vibrating with calls and texts he refused to answer. That evening, Mrs. Patterson knocked on his door. Her expression was pained when he answered. "Mason, honey, I need to tell you something. Mr. Hendricks from the landlord's office called me. He's been hearing things about you, and he wanted to know if I felt unsafe with you in the building." Mason felt the floor drop out from under him. "Mrs. Patterson, I told him he was being ridiculous." She cut him off firmly. "I told him you're a good man and a wonderful father, and that whatever gossip he'd heard was exactly that, gossip. But Mason—" She reached out and squeezed his arm. "You need to be careful. People are talking, and not all of them are as willing to think the best of you as I am." After she left, Mason stood in his kitchen and finally let himself feel the full weight of what was happening. This wasn't just a work problem anymore. This was threatening his home, his reputation, his ability to exist in his own community. This was threatening everything he'd built for Caleb. And the worst part, the part that made him want to put his fist through the wall, was that he'd done nothing wrong. He'd helped someone. That was it. That was his entire crime. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a funeral. Mason dressed carefully, his best khakis, a button-down shirt, his only sport coat. He wanted to look professional, respectable, like someone who couldn't possibly be the predator the rumors painted him as. He dropped Caleb at school early, hugging his son a little tighter than usual. "Love you, buddy. Have a good day." "Love you too, Daddy. Are you going to fix the confusion at work?" "I'm going to try." The drive to Apex headquarters felt surreal. Mason had made this trip hundreds of times, but now the building looked different, like enemy territory instead of his workplace. He parked in the visitor lot since he no longer had access to the employee garage, and walked through the main entrance like a stranger. Security made him sign in and gave him a visitor badge. The guard, someone Mason had joked with dozens of times, kept his eyes on his computer screen the entire time. The HR conference room was on the third floor, and Mason's legs felt like lead as he climbed the stairs. He was 15 minutes early, but the door was already open. Inside, the two HR reps from his first meeting sat on one side of a long table. Across from them, in a chair that somehow managed to look like a throne, sat Victoria Hale. Mason's breath caught. This was the first time he'd seen her since that night, and the difference was staggering. Gone was the vulnerable, broken woman from the penthouse. This Victoria wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Mason's car, her dark hair pulled back severely, her expression absolutely unreadable. She looked like the CEO from the company videos, powerful, controlled, untouchable. She also looked exhausted. Up close, Mason could see dark circles under her eyes that makeup didn't quite hide, a tightness around her mouth that suggested too many sleepless nights. Mr. Reed, the male HR rep, Mason had learned his name was Douglas, gestured to a chair on the opposite side of the table. "Please sit." Mason sat, hyper-aware of how this looked. Him on one side, alone. Victoria and the HR reps on the other, a united front. He was outnumbered and outgunned before the conversation even started. "Thank you for coming," the female rep, Sandra, said with false warmth. "We've completed our preliminary investigation into the events of October 18th, and we wanted to discuss our findings with both parties present." Mason's jaw tightened. "I'd like to state for the record that I've done nothing wrong." "Noted." Douglas opened a folder. "Miss Hale, would you like to provide your account of that evening?" Victoria's eyes met Mason's for the first time, and something flickered in them that he couldn't read. Then she looked at the HR reps with a coldness that could freeze steel. "I'd like to know," she said quietly, why this meeting is happening at all. Sandra blinked. I'm sorry? This meeting. This investigation. I want to know who authorized it, who filed the initial complaints, and why I, the supposed victim in this narrative, was never consulted before you suspended one of my employees. The HR reps exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Ms. Hale, several executives expressed concern about potential inappropriate conduct. Which executives? Victoria's voice could have cut glass. I want names. That information is confidential. I'm the CEO. Victoria leaned forward slightly, and both HR reps actually flinched. There is no confidentiality from me in my own company. Who filed complaints against Mr. Reed? Douglas cleared his throat. Richard Thornton, Elena Vasquez, and Marcus, the same three people who left me drunk at a party and disappeared back to their champagne rather than ensuring I got home safely. Victoria's voice was flat, stating facts. The same three people who've been angling for board positions and see taking down a CEO as a potential opportunity. Those executives? Ms. Hale, their concerns were legitimate. Were they? Victoria pulled out a tablet and tapped it once. Because I've spent the last week reviewing every second of security footage from that night, every angle, every camera, and I'd very much like you both to see what actually happened. She turned the tablet around, and Mason's heart stuttered. On screen was footage from the parking garage, himself opening the car door, helping Victoria inside with careful, impersonal efficiency. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 11:52 p.m. Victoria swiped to the next video. The lobby of her building, Mason supporting her as they walked, his face set in concentration, his body language screaming discomfort rather than opportunity. 12:17 a.m. Another swipe. The elevator, Mason standing carefully away from Victoria, arms at his sides, looking anywhere but at her. 12:19 a.m. Should I continue? Victoria asked coldly. Because I have footage from 11 different cameras, and every single one tells the same story. Mr. Reed helped me into my building. He helped me to my bedroom. He made sure I had water. And then he went downstairs and fell asleep on my couch for approximately 3 hours before leaving. At no point did he touch me inappropriately. At no point did he enter rooms he didn't need to. At no point did he do anything except ensure I was safe. The conference room was utterly silent. Ms. Hale, Sandra tried again, her voice weaker now. The photo that circulated showed exactly what I just described. Victoria's eyes were ice. A man helping a drunk woman walk. The angle made it look intimate. The reality was anything but. And rather than verify facts, rather than actually investigate what happened, you chose to suspend a single father based on gossip and a deliberately misleading photo. Mason couldn't breathe. She'd watched the footage. She'd seen the truth. She was fighting for him. Douglas shuffled papers nervously. The executives who filed complaints suggested that Mr. Reed might have had ulterior motives, that he saw an opportunity. To what? Victoria's voice rose for the first time. To help someone in need? To act like a decent human being? God forbid. She stood up, and everyone in the room instinctively leaned back. Let me tell you what actually happened that night. I was drugged. The words dropped like bombs. Mason's head snapped up. What? The toxicology report came back Friday. Victoria's face was carved from stone. Someone at that party slipped Rohypnol into my drink. The same party where your 3 complaining executives were present. The same party where they conveniently had a photographer ready to capture my drunk behavior. The same executives who then filed harassment charges against the one person who made sure I got home safe instead of being abandoned in that parking garage where anything could have happened. Mason felt dizzy. Drugged. Victoria had been drugged, and he'd helped her, and those bastards had tried to destroy him for it. That's... Sandra looked genuinely shocked. Ms. Hale, if you were assaulted, I'm handling it. Victoria's tone left no room for discussion. But right now, we're addressing the fact that you suspended an innocent employee, destroyed his reputation throughout this company, and nearly ruined his life based on false allegations from people who are currently under criminal investigation. Douglas had gone pale. We were following standard protocol. Your standard protocol is garbage. Victoria sat back down, her movements controlled but her fury evident. Your standard protocol assumes guilt. It prioritizes covering the company's ass over protecting employees. And it nearly destroyed a good man because he made the mistake of being kind. She turned to Mason, and her expression softened slightly. Mr. Reed, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I should have made a statement immediately. I should have shut this down the moment I heard about it. I didn't, and you've suffered because of my delay. Mason found his voice. You were drugged. You had your own trauma to deal with. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. Victoria's voice was quiet but absolute. You stayed when anyone else would have left. You kept me safe when I was vulnerable. You did the right thing, and my company tried to crucify you for it. She looked back at the HR reps. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Reed's suspension is lifted immediately. He will be compensated for every day of missed work, with an additional month's salary as an apology. His record will be wiped completely clean. No notation of any investigation, no black marks, nothing. And every single employee who spread rumors, who shared that photo, who participated in destroying his reputation will face consequences. Ms. Hale, we can't possibly discipline that many people, Sandra started. Then you'll be busy. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Because I'm not running a company where cruelty and gossip are acceptable behaviors. We're going to have a meeting, all staff, today, and we're going to address exactly what happened here. That's not advisable from a legal standpoint. I don't care. Victoria stood again. Mr. Reed, you're dismissed. Please report back to work tomorrow morning and see Tom Phillips about your route schedule. We'll have your full compensation processed by end of day. Mason stood slowly, his legs unsteady. Ms. Hale, I appreciate this, but I don't want special treatment. I just want my name cleared. Your name will be cleared. Victoria's expression was fierce. In front of everyone who tried to bury it. I promise you that. Mason nodded and turned toward the door, his mind reeling. Then Victoria's voice stopped him. Mr. Reed? Thank you. For that night, for staying, for being the kind of person who gives a damn about someone they barely know. That's rarer than it should be. Mason met her eyes and saw something there beyond gratitude. A kind of recognition, maybe, or understanding, like she saw him as more than just a driver now. You asked me to stay, Mason said simply. I don't break promises to people who are scared. He left before she could respond, but he heard Sandra's voice as he reached the door. Ms. Hale, about the all-staff meeting, we really should consult legal before. Schedule it for 3 p.m. today. Main auditorium. Attendance mandatory. Victoria's voice was pure steel. And somebody find me Richard Thornton, Elena Vasquez, and Marcus Chen. We need to have a very serious conversation about their futures with this company. Mason walked out of the conference room feeling like he'd stepped into an alternate universe. His suspension was lifted. His name was being cleared. Victoria Hale, the ice-cold CEO, was going to war for him. He made it to his car before the shaking started. Mason sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, and finally let himself feel the terror of the last week, the relief of this morning, the anger at what had been done to him. Emotions crashed through him in waves until he couldn't tell one from another. His phone rang. Tom Phillips. Mason, just got word from Victoria's office. You're back on the schedule tomorrow. Listen, I'm sorry about... It's okay, Tom. Mason's voice was rough. You were doing your job. No, I should have fought harder for you. Should have known you wouldn't do what they said. Tom paused. There's an all-staff meeting at 3. They're saying it's about company culture and accountability. You planning to be there? Mason checked his watch. 11:43 a.m. He could pick up Caleb from school, tell him the good news, maybe take him out for ice cream to celebrate. Or he could go to that meeting and watch Victoria Hale torch the people who tried to destroy him. Yeah, Mason said. I'll be there. Good man. See you this afternoon. Mason drove home in a daze, his mind spinning through everything that had just happened. Victoria had been drugged. Someone had tried to hurt her, and when that failed, they'd tried to use the situation to undermine her. and Mason had been collateral damage in someone else's power play. The rage that thought triggered was hot and sharp, not just for himself, but for Victoria, for what had been done to her, for what could have happened if Mason hadn't been careful, if he'd been a different kind of man. He thought about Caleb's question, "Did you do something bad?" No. He'd done something right, and somehow, in this twisted world, that had nearly destroyed him. But it hadn't. He'd survived, and now there was going to be a reckoning. At 2:45 p.m., Mason walked back into Apex headquarters. This time, he didn't need a visitor badge. Tom had his ID card and vehicle keys waiting at dispatch, along with a handshake and a quiet "welcome back." The main auditorium was filling rapidly, employees streaming in with expressions ranging from curiosity to dread. Mason slipped into a seat in the back row, wanting to observe rather than be observed. Around him, conversations buzzed. Heard 3 executives got fired this morning. Something about that driver, Reed, the one who... Victoria herself is speaking. This has to be serious. At exactly 3 o'clock p.m., the auditorium lights dimmed. The murmuring crowd fell silent as Victoria Hale walked onto the stage, alone, without notes or teleprompter. She stood at the podium in that same charcoal suit, and the spotlight made her look simultaneously powerful and completely exhausted. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to show you something that will make you very uncomfortable, and then we're going to talk about what kind of company Apex is going to be moving forward." The auditorium was dead silent. 2 weeks ago, I attended our anniversary party. Many of you were there. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, someone drugged my drink. Victoria's voice never wavered, stating facts like quarterly earnings. I left that party impaired, vulnerable, and potentially in danger. 3 of our executives, former executives as of this morning, saw me in that condition. Rather than ensure I got home safely, they called a driver, took a photo designed to look compromising, and returned to their party. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mason saw heads turning, people looking for the executives Victoria had named. The driver they called was Mason Reed, a single father, an employee with 4 years of spotless service, a man who'd never given this company a single reason to doubt his character. Victoria paused, and her eyes scanned the room until they found Mason in the back. Mr. Reed helped me into a car. He drove me home. He made sure I was safe. And because he did exactly what any decent human being should do, you destroyed him. The weight of that "you" fell on the crowd like a hammer. You spread rumors. You shared edited photos and videos. You turned a simple act of kindness into a scandal. You made assumptions about his motives, his character, his integrity. You made his son hear gossip about his father at school. You made his neighbors question whether he was safe to live near. You nearly destroyed his entire life. And why? Victoria's voice had risen now, sharp with anger. Because it was easier to believe the worst than to find out the truth. Because gossip is more entertaining than facts. Because we've built a culture where cruelty is more acceptable than decency. She clicked a button, and the screen behind her lit up with security footage. This is what actually happened. The video played in silence. Mason helping Victoria walk, his face showing nothing but concentration and concern. The elevator, with him standing carefully distant. The lobby again. Then timestamp after timestamp, camera after camera, all showing the same story, a man keeping someone safe, nothing more. When the footage ended, Victoria's voice was quieter but somehow more intense. That's what you tried to destroy. Basic human decency. And you almost succeeded. Mason felt hundreds of eyes turned toward him, but he kept his gaze on Victoria. I've spent this morning making some changes, Victoria continued. Effective immediately, Apex has new policies. Any employee who spreads unverified information about a coworker will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. Any employee who shares private photos or videos of other employees will be immediately terminated. Any manager or executive who fails to verify facts before making accusations will be held personally accountable. She paused, letting that sink in. But more than new policies, we need a new culture. Because rules don't make people kind. Rules don't make people think before they speak. Rules don't create the kind of workplace where someone like Mason Reed can help someone in need without fearing for his livelihood. Victoria's eyes found Mason again. Mr. Reed, would you please come up here? Mason's heart stopped. Every eye in the auditorium turned to stare at him. This was the last thing he wanted. Public attention, a spotlight, any more scrutiny. But Victoria was waiting, and after what she'd just done for him, he couldn't refuse. Mason stood and walked down the aisle, feeling like every step took an hour. The stage seemed impossibly high, the lights impossibly bright. He climbed the steps and stood next to Victoria, who was watching him with something that looked almost like respect. "Tell them," she said quietly, meant only for him. "Tell them what it was like." Mason looked out at the sea of faces, and suddenly all the anger and fear and exhaustion of the past week crashed over him. These people had tried to destroy him. Some had been active participants, spreading rumors and sharing photos. Others had been passive enablers, believing what they heard without question. And now they were watching him, waiting. "I have a son," Mason heard himself say, his voice rough but carrying in the silent auditorium. "He's 6 years old. His name is Caleb. And 2 weeks ago, I had to explain to him why his friend's parents were suddenly treating us different. I had to explain why people at school were whispering. I had to look my 6-year-old son in the eye and promise him that everything would be okay, even though I didn't know if that was true." The auditorium stayed silent. "I helped Ms. Hale because it was the right thing to do. That's it. That's the whole story. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want gratitude. I definitely didn't want this." Mason gestured at the stage, at the crowd. "I just wanted to make sure someone who needed help got home safe. And for that, you tried to take away everything I'd built for my kid." His voice cracked slightly, and he didn't try to hide it. "I'm not angry at you for not believing me. I'm angry that you didn't even try to find out the truth before deciding I was guilty. I'm angry that it was easier to believe the worst than to give me the benefit of the doubt. And I'm angry that if Ms. Hale hadn't fought for me, I'd probably be jobless right now, trying to figure out how to explain to my son why we might lose our apartment." Mason looked at Victoria, then back at the crowd. "We're better than this. We have to be better than this. Because next time, the person in my position might not have evidence to save them. They might not have a CEO willing to fight for them. They might just be destroyed, and we'll all move on and forget. And another life will be ruined because we couldn't be bothered to care about the truth." He stepped back, his legs shaking, and Victoria moved forward to the podium. "Mr. Reed is being promoted," she said simply. "Director of Standards and Ethics. His job will be to make sure nothing like this ever happens again at Apex. To build a culture where truth matters more than gossip, where character counts more than appearances. And every single one of you will answer to him regarding workplace conduct." The announcement hit the crowd like a physical force. Murmurs erupted immediately. Victoria held up one hand. "This meeting is over. But before you leave, think about what you participated in over the last 2 weeks. Think about whether you'd want the same thing done to you. And think about what kind of company you want to work for. One that protects people like Mason Reed, or one that destroys them." She turned and walked off the stage, Mason following, and the auditorium erupted in conversation behind them. Victoria led Mason through a side door off the stage, away from the erupting auditorium and into a quiet corridor that felt like stepping into a different world. The muffled sounds of hundreds of conversations faded behind them, replaced by the hollow echo of their footsteps on polished floors. Mason's heart was still hammering from speaking in front of the entire company, from hearing Victoria announce a promotion he hadn't asked for and wasn't sure he wanted. "Ms. Hale," he started, but she held up one hand. "Not here." She gestured toward an elevator at the end of the hall. "My office. We need to talk properly." The executive floor was everything Mason had imagined, and nothing he'd ever expected to see firsthand. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle, art that probably cost more than his annual salary, the kind of hushed, expensive silence that came from thick carpets and soundproofed walls. A receptionist looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Mason, but Victoria walked past without acknowledgement. Her office was enormous, the entire corner of the building, with views of both the city and the sound. But what struck Mason wasn't the luxury. It was how impersonal it felt, just like her penthouse. Minimal furniture, no photos, Nothing that suggested a life beyond work. The only personal touch was a small, wilted plant on the windowsill that someone had forgotten to water. Victoria moved to the windows, her back to Mason, shoulders rigid with tension that her controlled demeanor couldn't quite hide. Mason stood near the door, unsure whether to sit or wait, hyper-aware that he was in the CEO's office, that everything about this situation was surreal. "I need you to understand something." Victoria's voice was quiet, and she still hadn't turned around. "That promotion isn't charity. It's not compensation for what happened to you. It's because I watched you for 3 hours on security footage, and I saw something I haven't seen in this company in a very long time." "What's that?" Mason asked carefully. "Integrity." Victoria finally turned, and her expression was raw in a way that reminded Mason of that night in the car. "Do you know how many people passed me in that parking garage? How many employees saw me being loaded into a car by executives who couldn't wait to get back to their party? Dozens. And not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them questioned what was happening. They saw the CEO in distress, and they looked away because it was easier." Mason stayed quiet, sensing she needed to say this. "But you didn't look away." Victoria moved to her desk but didn't sit, instead gripping the edge like it was anchoring her. "You could have done the minimum. Driven me home, left me at the curb, reported mission complete. Instead, you made sure I got inside. You stayed when I asked, even though it was dangerous for you professionally. You kept your distance and your dignity, and you protected mine. And then you left a note so I'd know what happened when I woke up." She pulled open a desk drawer and removed a small piece of paper. Mason recognized his own handwriting. "I kept this," Victoria said, "because when I woke up Saturday morning, confused and terrified, this note was the only thing that told me I was safe, that someone had cared enough to make sure nothing happened to me." Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what that meant? To know that in my most vulnerable moment, I'd encountered actual decency?" Mason's throat felt tight. "You were in trouble. Anyone would have—" "No." Victoria cut him off firmly. "They wouldn't have. That's my point. Most people would have called someone else, covered their ass, documented everything to avoid liability. You just helped. No agenda, no calculation, just simple human kindness. And my company tried to destroy you for it because we've built a culture where kindness looks like weakness or manipulation." She set the note down and finally met his eyes directly. "I need you to fix that. The Director of Standards and Ethics position isn't ceremonial. It's real. You'll have authority to investigate complaints, recommend disciplinary actions, implement training programs, reshape how we handle these situations. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have the power to hold anyone accountable, including executives." Mason processed this slowly. "Ms. Hale, I'm a driver. I don't have HR experience. I don't have a degree in organizational psychology or whatever qualifies someone for this kind of role. You have something better." Victoria leaned forward. "You have perspective. You know what it's like to be on the receiving end of corporate cruelty. You know what it costs when systems fail the people they're supposed to protect. And you have the kind of character that doesn't bend under pressure. That's what I need." "What if I screw it up?" The question came out before Mason could stop it. "What if I make the wrong call, or I'm not smart enough to see through some complicated political situation, or—" "Then you'll learn." Victoria's voice softened slightly. "Mason, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to care. To approach every situation with the same decency you showed me. That's what's been missing here. Someone who gives a damn about doing right rather than doing what's politically safe." Mason looked at this woman who'd gone from vulnerable and drunk to commanding and fierce, who torpedoed 3 executives and implemented new policies and was now offering him a position that terrified him. And he saw the exhaustion behind her eyes, the weight she carried, the loneliness of her impersonal spaces. "Why?" he asked. "Really, why are you doing this?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved to the window, staring out at the city below. "When I was 26, I was assaulted by a senior executive at my first real job. He drugged me at a company event, and I woke up in a hotel room with no memory of how I got there. When I reported it, HR asked me what I'd been wearing. They questioned whether I'd been leading him on. They suggested maybe I'd just had too much to drink and was misremembering." Her voice was flat, reciting facts that still carried venom. They did nothing, and when I kept pushing, they made my life hell until I quit. Mason felt ice in his veins. Jesus. I built Apex because I promised myself I'd create something different, a place where power couldn't hide behind protocols, where the vulnerable weren't automatically blamed, where doing the right thing didn't get you punished. Victoria turned back to face him. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I got so focused on growth and profits and market share that I stopped paying attention to the culture I was building, and it became exactly what I tried to escape, a place where the powerful protect each other and everyone else is expendable. She crossed back to her desk and sat down finally, looking suddenly smaller despite the commanding office. What happened to you was my failure, Mason. I created a system that allowed it, and when those executives tried to use your kindness against you, they were following patterns I'd inadvertently enabled. So yes, this is personal, because you showed me what I'd lost, and I'm not losing it again. Mason sank into one of the chairs facing her desk, his mind reeling. This was so much bigger than one incident, one drug drink, one false accusation. This was about everything broken in corporate culture, about systems designed to protect institutions rather than people, about the cost of forgetting that companies were made of human beings who could bleed. I don't know if I can do this, he said honestly. I want to help, but I have Caleb to think about. He's been through enough these past 2 weeks. If I take a position this visible, this controversial, he's going to deal with fallout. Other parents are already treating us differently. If I become the person enforcing accountability, making people face consequences, your son will learn that doing the right thing matters more than being popular. Victoria's voice was gentle, but firm. He'll learn that his father doesn't back down when something important is on the line. He'll learn integrity by watching you live it. Those are lessons that will serve him far better than protecting him from temporary discomfort. Easy to say when it's not your kid taking the heat. True. Victoria nodded, accepting the point, which is why I'm also offering you a significant raise, better benefits, and flexible hours so you can be there for Caleb when he needs you. You'll work from home when necessary. You'll have support staff to handle logistics. And if anyone, and I mean anyone, gives you or your son grief because of your position, they'll answer to me personally. Mason looked at her, searching for the angle, the hidden cost, the trap. But all he saw was a woman who'd been failed by every system that should have protected her, trying to build something better before it was too late. Can I think about it? He asked. Not long, just a day or two. I need to talk to Caleb, make sure he understands what this might mean for us. Of course. Victoria pulled a business card from her desk and wrote something on the back. This is my personal cell. Call me when you've decided. If you say no, you keep your driving position. No questions asked, no hard feelings. But Mason? She met his eyes one more time. I really hope you say yes, because I can't fix this place alone, and I think you might be the only person here who actually understands what needs fixing. Mason took the card, feeling its weight like a promise or a threat. He left her office in a daze, made it to his car, and sat there staring at his phone. Caleb would be getting out of school in 40 minutes. Mason could pick him up, take him for ice cream, tell him everything was okay now, they were safe, Daddy had his job back, life could return to normal. Except nothing about this was normal. His phone buzzed, a text from Tom. Holy shit, Reed. Director? You're going to be my boss's boss's boss. Drinks are on you forever. Another text, this one from Derek. Man, I'm sorry about everything. I should have defended you. I should have known better. Congratulations on the promotion. You earned it. More texts flooded in, a mixture of congratulations and apologies and awkward attempts at humor from people who'd iced him out 2 weeks ago. Mason scrolled through them feeling nothing, then opened his photos and looked at his favorite picture of Caleb. Gap-toothed smile, dinosaur shirt, holding up a drawing of their family. Just the two of them, because Caleb didn't remember his mother enough to include her anymore. What would Caleb want his dad to do? The answer came immediately. Caleb would want his dad to help people, because that's what Mason had taught him, through actions more than words. Be kind. Stand up for what's right. Help when you can, even when it's hard. But Caleb was 6. He didn't understand office politics or corporate warfare or the cost of making yourself a target. He didn't know that sometimes helping people meant painting a bullseye on your own back. Mason's phone rang, and Mrs. Patterson's name appeared on screen. Hi, Mrs. Patterson. Mason, honey, I just saw the news. Her voice was bright with relief. Channel 7 is reporting that you've been cleared, that there was an investigation, and you did nothing wrong. They're showing your photo and everything, saying you're some kind of hero. Mason's stomach dropped. They're what? It's all over the local news, dear. Local driver vindicated after false harassment claims. That's the headline. They interviewed some PR person from Apex who said you'd been promoted for exceptional character. Mason, this is wonderful. Your name is cleared publicly. Mason closed his eyes. Of course the media had picked it up. Victoria's all-staff meeting, the dramatic revelation, the promotion. It was exactly the kind of story that played well on evening news. Human interest, corporate scandal, redemption arc all wrapped together, which meant every parent at Caleb's school would see it, every neighbor in their building. Every person who judged Mason based on rumors would now know the truth. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like exposure, like his entire life was being broadcast for public consumption. His worst moment and his vindication both turned into entertainment. That's great, Mrs. Patterson. Mason tried to inject enthusiasm into his voice. Listen, I need to go pick up Caleb. Thanks for letting me know. He hung up and sat there for another moment, then made a decision. He couldn't control the news cycle or public opinion or what people thought about him, but he could control what his son understood about all of this. And that started with honesty. Mason drove to Caleb's school and waited in the pickup line, hyper-aware of the other parents' stares. But this time, the looks were different, less judgment, more curiosity, with a healthy dose of guilt from those who'd clearly seen the news. One mother actually waved at him, an apologetic smile on her face. Mason waved back, keeping his expression neutral. Caleb came running out when his name was called, backpack bouncing, face lit with excitement. Daddy? Mrs. Chen said you were on TV. Are you famous now? Mason's heart clenched. Of course his teacher had mentioned it. Of course the kids had been talking. Not famous, buddy, just... There was some confusion at work, remember? It got cleared up, and some news people thought that was interesting. Tommy said his mom said she was sorry for being mean about you. Caleb climbed into his booster seat, and Mason buckled him in carefully. What does that mean? It means sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and when they realize it, they try to apologize. Mason got into the driver's seat and pulled out of the parking lot. Hey, how about we get ice cream and talk about something important? Is it bad important or good important? Good important. Maybe a little scary important, but mostly good. They went to their usual ice cream place, a small shop near their apartment where Caleb always got mint chocolate chip and Mason always got coffee. They sat at their regular table by the window, and Mason watched his son attack his cone with the single-minded focus of childhood before finally starting the conversation he'd been dreading. So, buddy, remember how I said I'm a driver for Apex? How I drive people places and make sure they get where they need to go safely? Caleb nodded, his mouth full of ice cream. Well, my boss, the person who runs the whole company, asked me if I wanted to do a different job, a bigger job. One where I'd help make sure everyone at the company treats each other with respect and kindness. Mason chose his words carefully. It would mean more responsibility and probably more work sometimes, but it would also mean we'd have more money and better benefits. Things would be more stable for us. Would you still be home at night? Caleb's question was immediate and piercing. Because sometimes when you work late, I miss you. I'd be home more, actually. This job would give me more control over my schedule. I could work from home sometimes, which means I'd be there when you get back from school more often. Caleb considered this seriously. Would you be happy? The question caught Mason off guard. What do you mean? Would the new job make you happy? Because Grandma used to say that people should do jobs that make them happy, not just jobs that make money. Caleb's grandmother, Mason's mother, had died when Caleb was 3, but some of her wisdom had apparently stuck. Mason thought about Victoria's exhausted eyes, about the culture of cruelty he'd experienced firsthand, about the opportunity to maybe prevent someone else from going through what he had. I think it would make me feel like I'm helping people, and that makes me happy. But buddy, here's the thing. This job might mean some people don't like me. Some people might think I'm too strict, or they might get mad when I have to tell them they did something wrong. It might make our lives a little more complicated sometimes. Like when you helped that lady and people were mean? Caleb's perceptiveness was both blessing and curse. Kind of like that, yeah. I'd be doing the right thing, but not everyone would understand or like it. Caleb finished his ice cream cone and wiped his hands carefully on a napkin, a habit Mason had taught him that still made him proud every time. Then his son looked at him with those serious 6-year-old eyes and said, I think you should do it. Yeah? Why? Because you're really good at being nice to people. And if someone needs to teach other people how to be nice, it should be you. Caleb paused. Also, you said we'd have more money. Does that mean I could get the dinosaur set with the T-Rex and the Triceratops? The big one? Mason laughed despite himself. Yeah, buddy, we could probably swing that. Then definitely do it. Besides, I don't care if some people are mad at you. I know you're the best dad, so their opinion doesn't matter. Caleb said this with the absolute certainty of childhood, and Mason felt tears prick his eyes. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're old. I'm 31. That's ancient, Caleb grinned. Are we done talking about important stuff? Because I want to go home and play dinosaurs. They drove home, and Mason felt something settle in his chest. Caleb's blessing, his complete faith that his dad was doing the right thing, mattered more than any professional consideration, more than fear of backlash or uncertainty about his qualifications or worry about future complications. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Mason sat on his couch and pulled out Victoria's card. Her personal cell number was written on the back in precise handwriting. He stared at it for a solid 5 minutes, phone in hand, second-guessing himself with every breath. Then he thought about the way Victoria had fought for him in that meeting, about the steel in her voice when she demanded accountability, about the exhaustion in her eyes that came from carrying too much alone for too long. He thought about every single person who'd spread rumors without caring whether they were true, about the 3 executives who'd tried to destroy him to cover their own crimes, about the broken systems that made cruelty easy and kindness dangerous. And he thought about his son's words. You're really good at being nice to people. If someone needs to teach other people how to be nice, it should be you. Mason dialed the number. Victoria answered on the second ring. Mason? I'll take the job. The words came out steady, certain. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I want training. Real training in HR procedures, workplace law, conflict resolution. Everything I'll need to do this right. I'm not going in unprepared and screwing up because I don't know what I'm doing. Agreed. I'll have a comprehensive training program designed. You'll shadow our best HR people, take courses, have mentors, whatever you need. Second, I want authority to investigate anyone, including executives. No exceptions, no protected classes. If someone's behavior is wrong, they face consequences regardless of their position or their relationships. That's exactly what I'm offering. Third, Mason paused, making sure he got this right. I want protection for the people who report problems. Whistleblower protection, anonymity when possible, and absolute zero tolerance for retaliation. I won't be the person who gives people hope and then lets them get crushed for speaking up. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's going to be complicated. Some situations require disclosure of sources for proper investigation. Then we figure out how to balance transparency with protection. But if someone comes to me for help, they don't get punished for it. That's non-negotiable. All right. Victoria's voice carried something that might have been respect. I can work with that. Anything else? Yeah, one more thing. Mason took a breath. I need you to understand that I'm going to get things wrong sometimes. I'm going to make mistakes, misjudge situations, maybe even make calls you disagree with. When that happens, I need you to tell me directly, privately, and give me the chance to fix it before any public consequences. I can't do this job if I'm terrified of being fired every time I'm imperfect. That's fair. Victoria sounded tired but genuine. Mason, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting effort, integrity, and growth. That's all. When do you want to start? Next Monday? I need a few days to wrap my head around this. Maybe do some preliminary reading on workplace ethics and HR best practices. Monday works. Come in at 9, we'll do official paperwork and start your orientation. She paused. Thank you, Mason. You're taking a risk on this, and I won't forget that. You took a risk on me first. Mason looked around his small apartment, at Caleb's drawings covering the fridge, at the life he'd built through careful choices and constant effort. Let's just make sure we both didn't make a huge mistake. Victoria's laugh was soft and unexpected. Too late to back out now. Get some rest. Monday's going to be intense. After hanging up, Mason sat in the darkness of his living room and let the weight of his decision settle. He'd just agreed to take on a job that would make him visible, controversial, and potentially hated by people who valued their power more than their principles. He'd volunteered to become the person who held others accountable, who investigated complaints, who decided what consequences people faced for their actions. It was terrifying. It was also exactly what needed doing. Mason checked on Caleb one more time, still fast asleep, one arm flung over his stuffed brachiosaurus, and whispered into the dark room, "We're going to be okay, buddy. Maybe better than okay. We're going to help make things better." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and adjustment. Mason spent hours online reading about workplace ethics, watching videos on conflict resolution, studying case law on harassment and discrimination. He made notes, highlighted passages, tried to absorb as much as possible before Monday arrived. The news coverage continued. Local stations ran follow-up pieces on the Apex Vindication story, as they were calling it. Some focused on Mason's promotion, others on the 3 fired executives who were now facing criminal charges related to Victoria's assault. One enterprising reporter tracked down Mason's apartment building and tried to interview neighbors about what kind of man he was. Mrs. Patterson, bless her, told them Mason was the finest young man I've ever met, and anyone who says different is welcome to discuss it with me personally. The clip made the evening news and became a minor viral moment online. Mason tried to ignore the attention and focus on what mattered. He took Caleb to the park, helped with homework, maintained their routines as much as possible, but he felt the shift in how people treated them. Neighbors who'd avoided eye contact now stopped to chat. Parents at school pickup made a point of being friendly. The manager at their grocery store, who'd been noticeably cold during Mason's suspension, suddenly remembered his name and asked how Caleb was doing. It was validating and exhausting in equal measure. Sunday evening, the night before his new job started, Mason sat Caleb down for another conversation. "Tomorrow I start my new job, buddy. Things might be a little different for a while as I figure everything out." "Will you be wearing a suit?" Caleb asked with great seriousness. "Because you look weird in suits." "Probably not every day, but sometimes." Mason smiled. "Hey, can I ask you something? Are you okay with all of this? The attention, the news stories, the way things changed?" Caleb thought about it, his face scrunched up in concentration. "I don't like when people stare at us. And Tommy's mom got really weird and nice, which is confusing because she was mean before. But mostly, I'm just glad you're not sad anymore." "I was sad?" "You tried to hide it, but I could tell." Caleb climbed into Mason's lap, something he'd been doing less and less as he got older. "You had that look you get when bills come and you think I don't notice you counting money, like you're worried about grown-up stuff." Mason wrapped his arms around his son and held on tight, overwhelmed by how much this kid saw and understood. "I'm sorry I made you worry." "It's okay. That's what families do. We worry about each other." Caleb yawned and snuggled closer. "But now you have a better job, so you can stop being worried about money, and I can stop being worried about you being worried. Deal." Mason kissed the top of his head. "Now go brush your teeth. School tomorrow." After Caleb was in bed, Mason laid out his clothes for the next day. Khakis, a button-down shirt, his one decent sport coat. Director of Standards and Ethics. The title still felt surreal, like a costume he was trying on rather than a position he'd earned. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Security will have a new badge and parking pass ready for you. Your office is on the 3rd floor, next to HR. I've scheduled our first meeting for 10 a.m. to review cases pending investigation. Good luck tomorrow. You're ready for this even if it doesn't feel like it." Mason stared at that last sentence. Was he ready? Could anyone really be ready to step into this kind of role, to carry this kind of responsibility? Another text, this one from Tom. "Just heard you're starting tomorrow. Coffee before you enter the lion's den? 8:30 at the shop across the street?" Mason replied, See you there. He set his phone aside and looked around his apartment one more time. Tomorrow, everything would change again. He'd go from invisible, just another driver in the fleet, to highly visible. People would watch him, judge him, test him. Some would resent his authority, others would try to manipulate him, and still others would genuinely need his help. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, Mason felt something that might have been purpose settling into his bones. For the first time in years, he was moving toward something meaningful rather than just grinding through survival. He wasn't just keeping his head above water anymore. He was swimming toward shore, and maybe pulling a few other people with him. Monday morning arrived with autumn rain, the kind of persistent Seattle drizzle that made everything look gray and somber. Mason dropped Caleb at school, accepted his son's fierce hug and whispered, "You've got this, Daddy," and drove toward Apex headquarters, feeling like he was heading into battle. Tom was waiting at the coffee shop as promised, 2 large coffees already on the table. He stood when Mason entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Tom stuck out his hand. "Director Reed, got a nice ring to it." Mason shook his hand, grateful for the normalcy. "It's still just Mason." "Not in that building, it's not." No, Tom gestured at the Apex Tower across the street. "In there, you're the guy everyone's talking about, the driver who became a director. The man Victoria Hale personally chose to clean house. You're either going to be a legend or a cautionary tale, and right now the odds are about 50-50. Mason sat down and took a long drink of coffee. "Thanks for the pep talk." "You want honesty or comfort? Because I only brought enough time for one." Tom's smile was wry but kind. "Look, people are watching. Some want you to succeed because they've been waiting for someone to hold leadership accountable. Others want you to fail because you represent change they don't want. And most are just waiting to see which way the wind blows before they decide where they stand. Any advice?" Tom considered this seriously. "Be fair. Be consistent. Document everything. And remember that the people who seem most supportive today might be the ones trying to undermine you tomorrow. Trust is earned slowly in corporate environments, and you're starting from a position where everyone knows your story, but nobody really knows you. So basically, trust no one and suspect everyone. Trust cautiously and verify constantly." Tom finished his coffee. "But also, don't lose what made Victoria choose you. That decency, that instinct to help people even when it costs you. That's your strength. Don't let the politics kill it." They walked across the street together, and Tom peeled off toward dispatch while Mason headed to the main entrance. Security had his new badge ready, along with a parking pass for the executive garage. The card identified him as Director Reed, Standards and Ethics Division, and felt like it weighed more than it should. His office was on the 3rd floor, as Victoria had said, and it was bigger than his entire living room at home. Windows overlooking the city, a real desk instead of the folding table he used at his apartment, bookshelves waiting to be filled, a small conference table for meetings. Everything new, everything expensive, everything screaming that he'd crossed from one world into another. Mason was still standing in the middle of his new office trying to process the magnitude of this transition when a knock at his door pulled him back to reality. A woman stood in the doorway, early 40s, wearing a crisp pantsuit and carrying a tablet like it was an extension of her arm. "Director Reed? I'm Patricia Alvarez, your assistant." She stepped inside with practiced efficiency. "Ms. Hale assigned me to help you get oriented and manage your schedule. I've worked in HR coordination for 8 years, so I know where most of the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking." Mason blinked. "I have an assistant?" "You have 2, actually. Damien handles research and documentation, and I handle scheduling, correspondence, and interdepartmental coordination. We're both reporting directly to you as of this morning." Patricia set her tablet on his desk and pulled up a screen. "Your 10 o'clock with Ms. Hale is confirmed. Before that, I've scheduled 30 minutes for us to review your pending case files and calendar. Unless you need more time to settle in?" "No, let's jump in." Mason sat behind his desk, the chair significantly nicer than anything he'd ever owned, and tried to look like he belonged there. "What kind of cases are we talking about?" Patricia swiped through screens with practiced ease. "Currently, you have 14 active cases. 5 are formal complaints filed through HR regarding harassment or discrimination. 3 are informal concerns that employees brought directly to Ms. Hale's attention during her recent review. 4 are legacy cases that were never properly investigated, and 2 are new complaints filed just this morning. 2 this morning? I've been here for 15 minutes. Word travels fast. People know there's a new sheriff in town, and some have been waiting for someone they think might actually listen. Patricia pulled up the first file. Case 1. Sarah Mitchell, warehouse operations, alleging her supervisor has been making inappropriate comments about her appearance for 6 months. She filed 3 separate complaints with HR, all of which were marked resolved without any documented investigation or consequences. Mason felt his jaw tighten. Let me see the file. Patricia handed him the tablet, and Mason read through Sarah Mitchell's complaints with growing anger. Each one was detailed, specific, included dates and witnesses, and described a pattern of behavior that was clearly hostile. And each one had been dismissed with a single line. Matter addressed with supervisor, no further action required. Who was the HR rep handling these? Mason asked. Douglas Kemp, same one who handled your suspension. Of course it was. Mason set the tablet down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. What happened to Douglas? Still employed, currently under review pending your assessment of his case management history. Patricia's tone was neutral, but Mason caught a flicker of something in her eyes that suggested her own opinion of Douglas wasn't favorable. Ms. Hale wants your recommendation on personnel decisions, but she's not moving forward with terminations or disciplinary actions until you've had a chance to review everything thoroughly. Smart. Don't want to replicate the same rush to judgment that happened to me. Mason pulled up the next case file. What's number 2? They worked through the cases methodically, and with each one Mason felt the scope of the problem growing clearer. This wasn't just about a few bad actors or isolated incidents. This was systemic failure, a culture where complaints went into a black hole, where HR protected the company rather than employees, where people who spoke up were quietly pushed out or marginalized until they gave up. By the time they finished reviewing the 14 cases, Mason had filled 3 pages with notes and questions. His handwriting was terrible, barely legible even to himself, but the act of writing helped him process the information. All right. He looked up at Patricia, who'd been watching him with an evaluating expression. I need to talk to each of these complainants personally. No intermediaries, no HR reps sitting in unless they specifically request it. I want to hear their stories directly and understand what they need. That's going to take significant time. Most HR investigations rely on written statements and documented evidence rather than personal interviews with every party. Then we're not doing it like most HR investigations. Mason stood and moved to the window, looking down at the city below. These people already tried the official channels and got ignored. If I just review paperwork and make decisions from behind this desk, I'm no different than the system that failed them. I need to look them in the eye, hear their voices, show them someone's actually listening. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then made notes on her tablet. I'll start scheduling interviews. Anything else you want me to prioritize? Yeah, I need to understand how complaints are supposed to be processed. Get me copies of every policy document, every HR procedure manual, every training material we give managers about handling workplace issues. I want to see what the system says should happen versus what actually happens. That's going to be a lot of reading. Good thing I can read at home after Caleb goes to sleep. Mason checked his watch. We've got 20 minutes before my meeting with Ms. Hale. What do I need to know about navigating executive politics around here? Patricia's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement or warning. You want the diplomatic answer or the real one? Always the real one. All right, real talk? She leaned against his desk. The executives are split on you. About a third genuinely support what you represent and want to see culture change. Another third are terrified because they've got skeletons in their closets. And you represent accountability they've avoided for years. The final third are watching and waiting to see which way power flows before they commit to a position. And Victoria? Ms. Hale is betting her reputation on you. Patricia's voice was serious now. The board wasn't thrilled about her unilateral decision to create this position and appoint you without a traditional search process. They're questioning her judgment, especially given the circumstances of how you two met. Some are suggesting she's acting emotionally rather than strategically. Mason felt his stomach drop. I'm making things harder for her. You're giving her the chance to prove she means what she says about changing company culture. But yes, if you fail, if you make bad calls, if you're seen as incompetent or biased, If you can't handle the pressure, it reflects on her. And there are people waiting for that to happen so they can push her out and return to business as usual. Jesus. Mason ran a hand through his hair. No pressure, right? Would you have preferred I lie and say everyone's on your side? No. Mason met her eyes directly. I appreciate the honesty. Keep doing that. If I'm screwing up, if I'm missing something important, tell me. I can't fix problems I don't know exist. Patricia nodded slowly, and something in her expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine respect. You know what? I think you might actually be different. Most people in your position would be more concerned with protecting themselves than asking for honest feedback. Most people in my position probably didn't get here by being a driver who helped someone get home safe. Mason grabbed his notepad. Come on, let's not keep the CEO waiting. Victoria's office felt different this time, less intimidating now that Mason understood the woman who occupied it. She was at her desk when he and Patricia arrived, reviewing something on her computer with the kind of intense focus that suggested she'd been at it for hours already. Mason! She looked up and gestured to the chairs across from her. Patricia, thank you for getting him oriented. Can you give us the room? After Patricia left, Victoria stood and moved to the small conference table by the windows, carrying a file folder that looked uncomfortably thick. Mason joined her, and they sat across from each other with the Seattle skyline as backdrop. How's the first hour treating you? Victoria asked. Overwhelming, eye-opening, little bit terrifying. Mason managed a tight smile. I've got 14 cases to work through, and every single one is making me angry at how badly the system failed people. Good. Stay angry. The moment you become comfortable with injustice is the moment you lose the ability to fight it. Victoria opened the folder. But before we dive into existing cases, I need to brief you on something that's going to hit the news cycle probably within the next 48 hours. Mason's chest tightened. What now? The 3 executives I terminated, Thornton, Vasquez, and Chen, have filed a lawsuit against Apex and me personally, alleging wrongful termination and defamation. They're claiming I fabricated the drugging incident to cover up a consensual encounter with you and that the terminations were retaliatory for their legitimate concerns about inappropriate conduct. The words hit Mason like physical blows. That's insane. There's literal video footage, which they're claiming was selectively edited to create a false narrative. Victoria's voice was flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they're working very hard not to feel what they're saying. Their lawyer is arguing that the toxicology report could have been falsified, that security footage can be manipulated, and that I'm using my position as CEO to silence whistleblowers who were trying to protect the company from a potential scandal. Mason felt sick. So they're doubling down. Instead of accepting consequences for what they did, they're trying to destroy both of us. It's a smart strategy, actually. Victoria's tone carried bitter admiration. If they can create enough doubt about what really happened, if they can paint themselves as victims of a vindictive CEO having an affair with her driver, they might be able to pressure the board into a settlement. At minimum, they'll drag this out publicly and make both our lives hell for months. What do you need from me? Honesty first. How much of this are you prepared to handle? Victoria met his eyes directly. Because this lawsuit means you're going to be named as a co-respondent, which means their lawyers will depose you, they'll dig through your entire life looking for anything to discredit you, they'll try to twist every interaction you and I have into evidence of an affair. Your son might hear about this at school. Your ex-wife might see an opportunity to challenge custody. This is going to get ugly. Mason thought about Caleb, about the stability they'd just started rebuilding, about the possibility of dragging his son through another media circus. Every instinct screamed at him to protect his kid, to remove them both from this situation before it exploded. But then he thought about Sarah Mitchell and her ignored complaints, about Victoria being drugged and then having her assault weaponized against her, about every person who'd ever tried to do the right thing only to be crushed by people with more power and fewer scruples. I'm in. The words came out steady, certain. Whatever they throw at us, we face it together. Because backing down now means they win, means the next person who needs help won't get it because everyone will be too scared of consequences. I'm not letting that happen. Victoria's expression softened slightly, vulnerability breaking through her controlled exterior. Mason, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He leaned forward. You stood up for me when it would have been easier to stay silent. You torched 3 executives and implemented new policies and created this entire position because you believed it was right, even knowing it would cost you politically. I'm not letting you fight this alone. You have a child to think about, which is exactly why I can't walk away. Mason's voice was fierce now. What kind of father would I be if I taught Caleb that integrity only matters when it's convenient? That you abandon people when the fight gets hard? That powerful people get to destroy others without consequences because challenging them is too scary? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Mason saw her blinking rapidly, fighting back emotion she usually kept locked away. Thank you, she said finally, her voice rough. That means more than you know. So what's our strategy? The company lawyers are handling the litigation, but I want you focused on something else. Victoria pulled documents from her folder. We need to bulletproof our case against those 3 executives. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every security video, I want it documented, verified, and ironclad. If this goes to trial, I want their lawyer to look at our evidence and realize they can't win. I can do that. What about the board? You said they're questioning your judgment. I'm presenting to them next week. I'll need you there to explain the ethics program you're building, demonstrate that this position is substantive rather than symbolic. If we can show the board that we're implementing real change, that accountability and ethics are good for the company long term, we might be able to neutralize some of the political pressure. Mason processed this, his mind already racing through what he'd need to prepare. I've got a week to build a comprehensive ethics program from scratch. You've got a week to present the foundation of one. You don't need it perfect, you need it compelling. Victoria's slight smile was encouraging. Show them you understand the problems, you have a plan to address them, and you're capable of executing that plan. The board respects competence and confidence. No problem. Mason's voice was dry. Just completely transform company culture, defend against a lawsuit, investigate 14 cases, and give a presentation to the board, all while being a single dad and learning how to do a job I've never been trained for. When you put it that way, it does sound somewhat ambitious. Victoria's smile widened slightly. Welcome to executive life, Mason. It's nothing but impossible expectations and constant pressure. You'll hate it. Despite everything, Mason laughed. Yeah, but the coffee's better than what we had in the driver's lounge. They spent the next hour reviewing specifics, and Mason found himself genuinely impressed by Victoria's strategic thinking. She'd already anticipated most of the attacks the executive's lawsuit would include, had documentation ready to counter their claims, and had even identified potential witnesses who could testify to the pattern of problematic behavior the 3 executives had exhibited long before the anniversary party incident. You've been planning this, Mason realized. You knew they'd sue the moment you fired them. I've been in this business long enough to know that powerful people don't go quietly. Victoria's expression was grim. They always fight back, and they fight dirty. The question is whether you're prepared to fight just as hard. Try me. Mason left Victoria's office with 3 inches of documents to review and a to-do list that would take months to complete, let alone 1 week. But he also left with something else, a clearer understanding of what he was fighting for and who he was fighting beside. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings. Patricia introduced him to Damien, his research assistant, who turned out to be a quiet, intense 26-year-old with degrees in organizational psychology and law. Together, they started building a framework for how complaints would be processed in the new system. Current process is bureaucratic and opaque, Damien explained, pulling up flowcharts on his computer. Complainant submits written statement to HR, HR assigns investigator, investigator interviews relevant parties, writes report, makes recommendation, recommendation goes to supervisor for action. Average time from complaint to resolution, 6 weeks. Actual investigation time, maybe 3 days. The rest is paperwork sitting in queues. And if the supervisor disagrees with the recommendation, Mason asked, they can override it, which they frequently do, especially if the person being complained about is valuable to the department. Damien clicked through case files. See this pattern? 37 complaints in the last 2 years against high-performing sales staff. 0 terminations, minimal consequences. Compare that to complaints against lower-level employees where the termination rate is 63%. Mason felt his anger rising again. So the system protects star performers at the expense of everyone else. Correct. Which creates an environment where certain people can abuse their position indefinitely because they're too important to lose. Damien looked at Mason with interest. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we need to remove supervisor override authority for ethics violations. Recommendations should come to me, and I make the final call based on evidence and policy, not on someone's quarterly sales numbers. That's going to piss off a lot of people. Good. The right people should be pissed off. Mason stood and moved to the whiteboard mounted on his wall. Let's map out what the new process should look like. Focus on speed, transparency, and consistency. They worked for 2 hours straight, and by the time Patricia knocked to tell Mason he needed to leave to pick up Caleb from school, they had the skeleton of a new complaint system that cut the average processing time from 6 weeks to 2 weeks, while adding more actual investigation and less bureaucratic delay. This is solid work, Mason told Damien. Clean it up and have it ready for me to review tonight after my kid goes to bed. We'll present it to Victoria tomorrow for feedback. The drive to Caleb's school felt surreal, like Mason was living two completely different lives simultaneously. In one life, he was Director Reed, rebuilding corporate ethics systems and preparing to face down a lawsuit. In the other, he was just Dad, worrying about whether Caleb had remembered to turn in his homework and whether they had enough milk for breakfast tomorrow. Caleb came running out with his usual enthusiasm, completely oblivious to the high-stakes drama consuming his father's professional life. Daddy, we learned about volcanoes today. Did you know that lava can be like 1,000 degrees? That's hot. Mason helped him into the car. How was lunch? Good. I traded my apple slices for Tommy's cookies, but don't tell Mrs. Patterson because she says I need to eat healthy. Caleb's expression was guilty and gleeful in equal measure. Your secret's safe with me. Mason pulled out of the parking lot. Hey, buddy, remember how we talked about my new job maybe making some people upset? Yeah? Well, there might be some more news stories about me and about the company. If kids at school say stuff, or if their parents act weird, you can tell me, okay? I want to know if anything's bothering you. Caleb considered this seriously. Is it bad news stories or good news stories? Probably a mix of both. Some people think what I'm doing is good, and some people are mad about it. Are you doing something good? I'm trying to. Then the mad people are just wrong. Caleb said this with absolute 6-year-old certainty. Can we have tacos for dinner? They had tacos, and Mason helped with homework, and they played dinosaurs until bedtime. After Caleb fell asleep, Mason opened his laptop and dove into the mountain of work waiting for him. He reviewed Damien's process flowcharts, read through HR policy manuals, and started drafting notes for his board presentation. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mason almost ignored it, but something made him open it. The message contained a single photo, a grainy image of Mason and Victoria sitting at the conference table in her office earlier that day. The angle suggested it had been taken through the window from another building, using a telephoto lens. Below the image, looks cozy. Wonder what the board will think about the CEO's special relationship with her new director. Mason's blood ran cold. He immediately called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. I got one too. Someone's watching us, taking photos through your office window. Mason's voice was tight. This is the executive's lawsuit strategy, isn't it? They're going to manufacture evidence of an affair. It's smart. Cheaper than legal fees and potentially more effective. Victoria sounded exhausted. I've already called security. They're reviewing building access records and checking for surveillance equipment. But Mason, this is what I meant about things getting ugly. I know. Mason looked at the photo again, at how innocent and professional the actual interaction had been, at how easily it could be spun into something else. What do we do? We're careful. No closed-door meetings without Patricia or another witness present. No private dinners, no casual coffee, nothing that could be photographed and misinterpreted. We document everything, keep our interactions purely professional, and don't give them ammunition. That's going to make working together harder. I know. Victoria's voice carried frustration and resignation. But we don't have a choice. They're looking for any excuse to paint this as something inappropriate, so we have to be beyond reproach. After hanging up, Mason sat in the darkness of his living room, staring at that photo and feeling the walls closing in. This was the cost of fighting powerful people who had nothing to lose. They'd drag him through hell, threaten everything he'd built, and weaponize simple professional interactions into scandals. But backing down meant letting them win, meant letting Sarah Mitchell and dozens of others like her continue being ignored, meant teaching Caleb that integrity was negotiable when the price got too high. Mason deleted the text and blocked the number, knowing it wouldn't matter, they'd just use another one. Then he went back to his laptop and kept working, because what else could he do? Give up? Let the bastards destroy everything Victoria was trying to build? Not a chance. The rest of the week was a gauntlet of interviews with the 14 complainants whose cases had been mishandled. Mason met with each one personally, and every conversation reinforced why this work mattered and how badly the system had failed people. Sarah Mitchell was first, a 29-year-old single mother who worked in the warehouse and had been subjected to her supervisor's inappropriate comments for 6 months. She sat across from Mason in his office, her hands twisted in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper as she recounted filing 3 separate complaints that went nowhere. "I thought about quitting," she said quietly, "but I need this job. I've got 2 kids, and the benefits here are better than anywhere else I could work with just a high school diploma. So I just tried to avoid him, tried to make myself invisible, tried to pretend I didn't hear the things he said." Her eyes met Mason's. "Are you actually going to do something? Or is this just another way to make it look like the company cares while nothing changes?" Mason felt the weight of her doubt, earned through experience with a system that had betrayed her repeatedly. "I'm going to do something," he said. "I can't promise the outcome you want. I need to investigate properly, talk to witnesses, review evidence. But I promise you this, your complaint will be taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, and decided based on facts and policy, not on who's more valuable to the company. And regardless of the outcome, you will not face retaliation for speaking up. That's my job now, to make sure that doesn't happen." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think anyone would care." "I care. And I'm sorry it took this long for someone to actually listen to you." Each interview was similar. People who'd been brave enough to speak up, only to have their courage weaponized against them, or dismissed as overreaction or misunderstanding. By the end of the week, Mason had 14 detailed case files, pages of notes, and a burning determination to make sure every single one got the investigation they should have received the first time. He also had his board presentation drafted, reviewed by Victoria, revised 3 times, and polished until it shone. Damien and Patricia had helped him create visual aids, compile data on the cost of poor workplace culture, and prepare answers to likely questions. Mason practiced his delivery until the words felt natural, until he could discuss ethics frameworks and accountability structures without sounding like someone reading from a manual. Friday evening, after picking up Caleb from school, Mason drove to Mrs. Patterson's apartment instead of going home. She opened the door with her usual warm smile. "Mason, honey, what a nice surprise. Come in, come in." Caleb ran inside to pet Mrs. Patterson's ancient cat, and Mason stood awkwardly in her small, cozy living room that smelled like vanilla and old books. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Her expression shifted to concern. "What is it? Has anyone approached you? Reporters, lawyers, private investigators, anyone asking questions about me or Caleb, about our personal lives, our routines, anything?" Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. "A man came by Tuesday, said he was doing a background check for your new position, wanted to know about your character, how you treated your son, whether I'd ever seen you behave inappropriately. I told him to leave or I'd call the police." Mason closed his eyes. "Thank you for that." "Mason, what's going on? Is someone trying to hurt you?" "Some people are trying to create problems that don't exist. They're looking for anything they can twist into evidence that I'm not fit for my job." Mason met her eyes. "I need you to know that if anyone else comes around, if anyone tries to talk to you about me, you don't owe them anything. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to be polite. Just tell them to contact me directly." Mrs. Patterson reached out and squeezed his arm. "Those people don't know you. They don't know that you're the kind of father who reads bedtime stories 3 times because his son asks. They don't know that you volunteer at the school library even though you're exhausted from work. They don't know that you've never once raised your voice to that beautiful boy, even on the hardest days." Her voice was fierce. "So let them dig. Let them investigate. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find except a good man trying his best. Mason felt his throat tighten. Thank you. For believing in me, for watching Caleb, for being the family we don't have anywhere else. Oh, honey. Mrs. Patterson pulled him into a hug that smelled like lavender and home. You're going to be fine, both of you. You're stronger than whatever they throw at you. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Mason received an email from Victoria with the subject line, Monday morning. Inside was a single sentence. Board meeting at 9 a.m. Conference room A. Don't be late. Mason sat at his laptop, looking at the presentation he'd spent all week preparing, thinking about 14 people who deserved justice, about a woman who'd been drugged and assaulted and was now being sued by her attackers, about his son sleeping peacefully down the hall, trusting that his father could handle whatever came next. Monday morning, Mason would walk into a room full of Apex's board members and convince them that ethics mattered, that accountability wasn't just corporate jargon, that one former driver could actually change the culture of an entire company. It should have been impossible. But then again, 2 weeks ago it had seemed impossible that he'd survive false accusations. A month ago, it had seemed impossible that he'd ever be anything more than invisible. 6 years ago, it had seemed impossible that he could raise a son alone and actually do right by him. Mason had built his entire life on doing impossible things one day at a time. Monday was just going to be another day. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Seattle beautiful and unforgiving in equal measure. Mason dropped Caleb at school earlier than usual, accepting his son's tight hug, and whispered, "You're going to be great, Daddy," with a gratitude that made his chest ache. Then he drove to Apex headquarters feeling like a gladiator heading into the arena, armed with nothing but a presentation and the desperate hope that truth still mattered to someone. The executive parking garage felt different now that Mason had legitimate access to it. He parked in his assigned spot, still couldn't quite believe he had an assigned spot, and took the elevator to the top floor where the boardroom occupied prime real estate with views that probably cost more per square foot than most people's homes. Victoria was already there when Mason arrived at 8:30, reviewing notes at the head of an enormous conference table that could seat 20. She looked up as he entered, and Mason saw the exhaustion she usually hid so well. Dark circles under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth, the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her pen. "You look how I feel," Mason said quietly. "Didn't sleep much." Victoria gestured to the chair beside her. The board received an interesting package Friday afternoon. Anonymous, of course. Photos of us in my office, heavily edited to suggest intimacy that doesn't exist. Accompanying letter explaining that I've created this ethics position as cover for an affair with a subordinate and suggesting that my judgment is compromised by personal involvement. Mason's stomach dropped. The executive's legal team. Almost certainly, it's a smart preemptive strike. Undermine my credibility before I can present the ethics program. Make the board question whether any of this is legitimate versus personal. Victoria's smile was sharp and bitter. They're betting that corporate politics matter more than truth. Are they right? We're about to find out. Victoria checked her watch. Board members start arriving in 15 minutes. Gerald Hutchinson, the chairman, will lead the questioning. He's old school, built his career in the 80s when workplace harassment was called office romance and accountability was something that happened to other people. He's skeptical of anything that smells like political correctness or cultural change. Great. So I'm pitching progressive ethics reform to someone who thinks the old ways were fine. 3 other board members are similarly inclined, but we have 4 who are genuinely concerned about company culture and legal liability. The remaining 2 will vote based on whether they think we're serious about this or just creating expensive theater. Victoria met Mason's eyes. Your presentation needs to convince the fence sitters that you're competent, that this program has substance, and that ethics reform is good business, not just good optics. No pressure. Mason, Victoria's voice softened, I wouldn't have put you in this position if I didn't believe you could handle it. You've done excellent work this week. Those case files are thorough, your process redesign is solid, and your instincts about people are better than most trained investigators I've worked with. Trust yourself. Before Mason could respond, Patricia appeared in the doorway. Board members arriving, 5 minutes to start time. The next 5 minutes were a blur of introductions as board members filed in. each one radiating the kind of power that came from decades of corporate warfare and investment portfolios worth more than small countries. Gerald Hutchinson was exactly what Mason expected. Silver-haired, expensive suit, handshake designed to establish dominance, eyes that assessed and dismissed in the same glance. "So you're the driver?" Hutchinson's tone made it sound like an accusation. "Former driver," Mason corrected politely. "Currently Director of Standards and Ethics." "Yes, we heard about that appointment. Quite sudden, wasn't it?" Hutchinson took his seat at the opposite end of the table from Victoria. "I'm looking forward to understanding the reasoning behind creating an entire division for one unvetted employee." The implication was clear. This was a sham position created to cover inappropriate behavior. Mason felt his jaw tighten, but Victoria spoke before he could respond. "All of that will be addressed in this morning's presentation. Shall we begin?" The board settled, and Mason suddenly found himself standing at the front of the room with a remote control that felt slippery in his sweating palm, facing 11 people who had the power to destroy everything before it even started. He clicked to the first slide, a simple title that read Building Accountability, the Case for Ethics Reform at Apex Logistics. 2 weeks ago, Mason began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I was a driver. I'd worked for Apex for 4 years, shown up on time, did my job, went home to my son. I was invisible to most of you, which was fine. I wasn't trying to be noticed. I was trying to provide stability for my kid." He clicked to the next slide, which showed the timeline of events from the anniversary party to his suspension to his eventual vindication. "Then I helped someone who needed help, and your company tried to destroy me for it. Not because I did anything wrong, but because the system you've built values appearances over truth, protects power over people, and punishes decency when it's inconvenient." Mason met Hutchinson's eyes directly. "Ms. Hale created this position because she recognized that what happened to me was a symptom of a much larger problem. And if we're being honest, the question isn't whether this problem exists, it's whether you care enough to fix it." He clicked through slides showing data Damien had compiled. 37 complaints against high performers with 0 terminations, 63% termination rate for complaints against lower-level employees, average 6-week delay in processing complaints, patterns of retaliation against complainants that drove turnover and created legal liability. "This isn't just morally wrong," Mason continued. "It's expensive. Employee turnover cost you approximately 1.5 times an annual salary per employee lost. Legal settlements for harassment and discrimination cases have cost Apex $4.3 million over the past 3 years. Reputation damage from public scandals affects recruitment, client relations, and investor confidence. You're paying a premium for a toxic culture, and you're not even getting the benefit of actually protecting your people." One of the female board members, Rebecca Chen, who Victoria had identified as an ally, leaned forward. "What's your proposed solution?" Mason clicked to his process redesign. "Streamlined complaint system that cuts processing time from 6 weeks to 2 weeks, while adding actual investigation instead of bureaucratic delay. All complaints go through my office rather than individual HR reps, which creates consistency and removes the conflict of interest when HR's primary loyalty is protecting the company. Investigations are based on evidence and policy, not on the economic value of the person being complained about. Recommendations come to me, and I make the final call on consequences." "That's a lot of power in one person's hands," Hutchinson said coldly. "Especially someone with no formal training or credentials in this area. What makes you qualified to make these decisions?" Mason had been waiting for this question. "You're right that I don't have an HR degree or years of corporate experience. What I have is perspective that everyone in this room lacks. I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of a broken system. I know what it costs when complaints are ignored, when power protects itself, when doing the right thing becomes dangerous. And I know that the people who need protection most are the ones who don't have lawyers or board connections or the political capital to fight back." He clicked to the next slide, which showed photos, carefully anonymized, of the 14 complainants he'd interviewed. These are real people whose complaints were mishandled or ignored entirely. Sarah Mitchell, whose supervisor harassed her for 6 months while HR marked her complaints resolved without investigation. James Chen, who reported safety violations and was transferred to a worse position as retaliation. Monica Torres, who witnessed discrimination and was told she was overreacting without anyone bothering to verify her claims. Mason's voice was heating up now, the anger he'd been controlling all week finally breaking through. You want to know what makes me qualified? I give a damn about these people. I don't see them as potential liabilities or PR problems. I see them as human beings who deserve to come to work without being harassed or discriminated against or retaliated against for speaking up. And apparently that basic level of caring is radical enough to require a dedicated position. The room was silent. Hutchinson's expression was unreadable, but several other board members were leaning forward, engaged. Rebecca Chen spoke again. Walk us through a specific case. How would your system handle it differently than the current process? Mason pulled up Sarah Mitchell's file. With her permission, secured over the weekend. Sarah works in the warehouse. Her supervisor made inappropriate comments about her appearance, her body, whether she was trying to get attention by wearing certain clothes. She documented everything. Dates, times, witnesses, specific quotes. She filed her first complaint in March. HR assigned Douglas Kemp, who interviewed Sarah once, never spoke to witnesses, and marked the case resolved after supposedly counseling the supervisor. No documentation of what that counseling entailed. No follow-up to verify the behavior stopped. He clicked through screenshots of the actual case file, with sensitive information redacted. Sarah filed 2 more complaints over the next 4 months. Same process, same non-result. By September, she'd stopped reporting because she realized nothing would change, and she was just painting a target on her own back. Under my system, Mason continued, Sarah's first complaint comes directly to me. I interview her, then I interview the supervisor, then I interview every witness she named. I review any relevant documentation, security footage if applicable, email or text communications, performance reviews to check for retaliation patterns. I document everything thoroughly. Then I make a determination based on facts. Did the behavior happen? Does it violate policy? What's the appropriate consequence? And in this case, Hutchinson asked, though his tone had shifted slightly from dismissive to genuinely curious. In this case, 3 witnesses confirmed the supervisor's inappropriate comments. Security footage showed him cornering Sarah in break rooms and storage areas. His own text messages, which he stupidly sent from his company phone, contained explicit discussions with another supervisor about Sarah's appearance. Mason's voice was hard. The behavior clearly happened. It clearly violated policy, and it clearly created a hostile work environment. Appropriate consequence, termination. The supervisor was fired Friday afternoon. Murmurs around the table. One of the older male board members, Thomas Westbrook, frowned. That seems extreme for comments. Whatever happened to warnings, coaching, giving people a chance to improve? He had 6 months and 3 formal complaints as chances to improve, Mason said flatly. At what point does continued harassment become grounds for consequence? How many times does Sarah have to ask for help before her comfort and safety matter more than his feelings about being held accountable? But his employment record was excellent, I know. High performance metrics, good attendance, positive reviews from his own supervisor who apparently never bothered to check how he treated his subordinates. Mason leaned forward. Here's the thing I learned this week, Mr. Westbrook. Someone can be great at the technical aspects of their job while being terrible at treating people with basic respect. And when we decide that performance metrics matter more than human decency, we're telling everyone in this company that certain people are allowed to abuse their power as long as they hit their numbers. The room was quiet again. Victoria hadn't said a word, letting Mason make his case without interference. Rebecca Chen spoke thoughtfully. You've made a compelling argument for why the current system is broken. What I'm less clear on is sustainability. You can't personally investigate every complaint that comes through a company this size. How do you scale this approach? Training and delegation, Mason answered. I'm building a team, investigators who share the same philosophy and will handle cases according to consistent standards. I'll train them personally, review their work, and maintain quality control. For major cases involving executives or sensitive situations, I handle it directly. For routine matters that follow clear patterns, trained investigators can process them efficiently. He clicked to his staffing proposal. I'm requesting budget for 3 additional investigators, 2 administrative coordinators, and a legal advisor who can ensure our processes hold up under scrutiny. Total cost? approximately $800,000 annually. Compare that to the $4.3 million you've paid in settlements over 3 years, plus the uncalculated costs of turnover and reputation damage. This program pays for itself if it prevents even one major lawsuit. Gerald Hutchinson leaned back in his chair, studying Mason with an expression that had shifted from hostile to evaluating. You present well for someone without corporate experience. But here's what concerns me. You're personally involved in the situation that prompted this entire program. You were falsely accused, you were vindicated, and now you're in a position of power over the people who created that situation. How do we know this isn't retaliation disguised as ethics reform? The question was fair, and Mason had been preparing for it all week. You don't, he said simply. You can't know my motivations with certainty any more than I could prove my innocence without security footage. What you can evaluate is my work product. Look at the 14 cases I've investigated so far. In 3 of them, I determined the complaints weren't substantiated and closed them without consequences for the accused. In 4 cases, I recommended coaching or training rather than termination. I'm not here to destroy people. I'm here to enforce standards fairly and consistently. He pulled up the case files. You want proof I'm not just punishing everyone? Here's Mark Daniels, accused of discrimination. Investigation showed the complainant misunderstood a legitimate business decision and interpreted it through a lens of bias that wasn't actually there. I closed that case and recommended mediation to repair the working relationship. Here's Jennifer Kwan, accused of harassment. Evidence showed she'd given constructive feedback that was harsh but appropriate. I closed that case and recommended management training for her to learn better communication skills. The point, Mason continued, is that I'm following the evidence wherever it leads, not using this position to settle scores. If I wanted revenge, I'd be finding reasons to fire everyone who spread rumors about me. Instead, I'm holding people accountable for actual policy violations based on documented evidence, regardless of whether they were involved in my situation. Thomas Westbrook spoke up again, though his tone was less challenging now. What about the lawsuit? The 3 terminated executives are claiming this entire program is a smokescreen for an inappropriate relationship between you and Ms. Hale. How do you respond to that? Mason looked at Victoria, who gave him a slight nod. This was his call on how much to reveal. The 3 terminated executives drugged Ms. Hale, Mason said bluntly. Toxicology reports confirm Rohypnol in her system. Security footage shows me helping her get home safely and staying at her request because she was vulnerable and scared. Their lawsuit is a desperation play by people facing criminal charges who want to create enough doubt to pressure a settlement. As for the claim of an inappropriate relationship, Mason pulled out his phone and held up the photo that had been texted to him. They're manufacturing evidence, taking telephoto shots through office windows, and editing them to suggest intimacy that doesn't exist. We know this because we've documented every interaction Ms. Hale and I have had, and we maintain professional boundaries specifically because we anticipated this strategy. He set the phone down. So yes, they're going to claim this is all fake. They're going to try to destroy both our reputations rather than face consequences for their actions. And you have to decide whether you believe the documented evidence of what actually happened or whether you believe the manufactured scandal designed to protect powerful people who don't want accountability. Gerald Hutchinson was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Victoria. You've been unusually silent, Ms. Hale. This is your initiative. Make your case. Victoria stood, commanding the room with the presence that had built Apex from regional company to national powerhouse. Gentlemen, Ms. Chen, I'll be direct because we don't have time for political games. Mason is right about everything he's presented. Our culture is broken. Our systems protect the wrong people. Our processes are designed to minimize corporate liability rather than actually address problems. And yes, I created this position without going through traditional hiring processes because traditional processes are part of what's broken. She walked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each board member. The lawsuit against me is frivolous and will be dismissed, but it's also indicative of a larger pattern. When we try to hold powerful people accountable, they weaponize the system against us. They manufacture scandals, they manipulate evidence, they threaten litigation until it's easier to back down than to keep fighting. And if we let that strategy work, If we allow 3 executives facing criminal charges to derail ethics reform through intimidation, we're sending a message to everyone at Apex about what really matters here. Which is, Hutchinson asked, power over principle, appearances over truth, protecting the status quo over protecting our people. Victoria's voice was steel. I didn't build this company to create another place where the vulnerable get crushed and the powerful get away with anything. I built it to be different, and somewhere along the way I lost sight of that. Mason reminded me what we should be, what we need to be, and I'm asking this board to support the hard work of actually becoming that company, rather than just claiming we already are. Rebecca Chen spoke up. I move that we approve the ethics program as presented, including the requested budget and staffing. We can revisit and adjust after 6 months based on results. I second, said another board member, an older man named David Park, who'd been quiet until now. Hutchinson looked around the table, reading the room. Discussion? Thomas Westbrook cleared his throat. I have concerns about the scope of authority being granted to someone without traditional qualifications. However, I'm persuaded that the current system is clearly inadequate, and Mr. Reed has demonstrated more competence in 1 week than our HR department has shown in years. I'll support this on a provisional basis. One by one, the board members weighed in. Some enthusiastically supportive, some reluctantly convinced, one vocally opposed. When it came time to vote, the result was 8 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstention. The ethics program was approved. Mason felt his knees actually weaken with relief. Victoria's expression remained controlled, but he caught the slight exhale that suggested she'd been holding tension he hadn't even noticed. Excellent, Hutchinson said, though he didn't sound particularly pleased. Mr. Reed, you have 6 months to prove this program delivers results. Ms. Hale, we'll expect quarterly updates on progress and costs. Meeting adjourned. The board members filed out, several stopping to shake Mason's hand or offer brief words of encouragement. Rebecca Chen pulled him aside as the room emptied. You did well in there, she said quietly. Gerald's a tough sell, and you handled his skepticism without getting defensive. That matters. She glanced at Victoria, who was gathering her materials. For what it's worth, I believe you're both acting in good faith, but you should know that not everyone is convinced. The lawsuit is going to keep this controversial, and there will be people waiting for you to fail. Don't give them ammunition. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask, Rebecca smiled. Good luck, Director Reed. After everyone left, Mason and Victoria stood alone in the enormous boardroom, both processing what had just happened. We did it, Mason said, still not quite believing it. You did it. Victoria's smile was genuine and exhausted. That presentation was exactly what the board needed to hear, passionate without being preachy, data-driven without being dry, personal without being self-indulgent. You made them care, Mason. That's no small thing. I just told the truth. The truth doesn't always win in boardrooms, but today it did. Victoria packed up her materials. Now comes the hard part, actually delivering on everything we promised. 6 months to show results. 6 months for the lawsuit to wind through courts. 6 months of everyone watching to see if this is real or just expensive theater. No pressure, Mason said again, but this time with a slight smile. His phone buzzed. Patricia. Sarah Mitchell is here to see you. Says it's important. Mason excused himself and headed down to his office, where Sarah was waiting with an expression that was nervous and determined in equal measure. She stood when he entered, clutching a folder against her chest. Ms. Mitchell, is everything all right? I heard you got the board's approval for the ethics program. Sarah's voice was shaking slightly. And I heard that my case was part of your presentation, that you used my situation to explain why this matters. With your permission, yes. Did I overstep? If you're uncomfortable with no, Sarah shook her head firmly. I'm grateful, because for 6 months, I felt invisible, like my discomfort didn't matter, like I was supposed to just accept being harassed as the price of having a job. And now the board of directors knows my name, knows what happened to me, knows that someone thought it was important enough to fight for. She held out the folder. These are from other women in the warehouse. 3 of them worked under the same supervisor before I did. They never reported because they'd heard nothing happened when people complained. But now that he's been fired, now that they see someone actually faced consequences, they want to come forward. Not for him, He's already gone. But there are two other supervisors who've done similar things, and these women finally believe someone might actually listen. Mason took the folder, feeling the weight of it, understanding what it represented. Have them contact Patricia to set up appointments. I'll interview each of them personally. Thank you. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. Thank you for making it matter, for making us matter. After Sarah left, Mason opened the folder and found 4 detailed written complaints, each one documenting patterns of harassment that had been happening for months or years, each one representing someone who'd been carrying this alone, thinking no one cared, until one single father had been vindicated and an entire ethics program had been built on the principle that everyone deserved basic dignity. The scale of the problem was overwhelming, but for the first time, Mason felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a real chance of fixing it. The next 3 months were a blur of work that consumed Mason's days and invaded his dreams. He hired his investigation team carefully, spending hours interviewing candidates and choosing people who shared his philosophy that accountability mattered more than convenience. He trained them personally, working through case studies and ethical dilemmas, teaching them to follow evidence rather than assumptions. The cases kept coming. Some were straightforward violations that required clear consequences. Others were complicated situations where good people had made mistakes and needed coaching rather than punishment. Mason learned to navigate the gray areas, to balance accountability with grace, to recognize that justice wasn't always about severity. Sometimes it was about helping people understand the impact of their behavior and giving them the chance to do better. The lawsuit ground forward with the glacial pace of corporate litigation. The 3 terminated executives' lawyers tried every trick: depositions designed to humiliate, discovery requests meant to overwhelm, press leaks calculated to embarrass. But Victoria's legal team was prepared, and the evidence was overwhelming. By February, the executive's lawyer was quietly approaching Victoria about settlement. They want to drop the lawsuit if we agree to non-disparagement clauses and a financial settlement, Victoria told Mason in one of their now carefully documented meetings with Patricia present. Essentially, they'll admit defeat if we pay them to go away quietly. What did you tell them? I told them to go to hell. Victoria's smile was sharp. We're not paying a settlement to people who drugged me and then tried to destroy you for helping me. We're going to trial, we're going to win, and we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what they did. The trial happened in March, and it was brutal. Mason spent 2 days being cross-examined by lawyers who tried to paint him as an opportunist who'd leveraged a vulnerable situation into career advancement. They questioned his qualifications, his motivations, his relationship with Victoria. They suggested his entire ethics program was a sham designed to cover an affair. Mason told the truth, simple and unwavering. He explained what happened that night, why he stayed, why he'd been careful, why he'd done nothing except help someone who needed help. He showed the jury his notes from that week of suspension, his texts to Mrs. Patterson, his desperate attempts to understand what was happening. He made them see him not as a calculating manipulator, but as a single father who'd been terrified of losing everything because he'd been kind. Victoria's testimony was equally powerful. She described the assault, the fear, the relief of waking up to Mason's note that proved she'd been protected rather than harmed. She described watching security footage and seeing the truth of what happened versus the lies being spread. And she described her decision to create the ethics program not as cover for an affair, but as recognition that her company had failed someone who deserved better. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. The verdict was unequivocal. The lawsuit was frivolous, the allegations were without merit, and the terminated executives were ordered to pay Apex's legal fees and issue public apologies. Mason stood in the courtroom and felt something release in his chest that he'd been holding tight since that night in October. Vindication. Complete, public, unquestionable vindication. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with questions. Victoria handled most of them with practiced ease, but she made a point of bringing Mason forward for one question. Director Reed, what does this verdict mean for the ethics program at Apex? Mason looked at the cameras and thought about Sarah Mitchell and the dozens of others who'd come forward since, about the culture they were slowly, painfully rebuilding. It means that accountability matters, that truth matters, that protecting people is more important than protecting reputations. And it means we're going to keep doing this work, Keep fighting to make Apex the kind of company where helping someone in need doesn't require courage. It just requires decency. That night, Mason picked Caleb up from Mrs. Patterson's and took him out for celebration dinner, pizza and ice cream, Caleb's favorite combination. His son was almost 7 now, had lost 2 more teeth, had moved up to chapter books, just like Mrs. Chen predicted. He was thriving in ways that still amazed Mason. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson showed me the news." Caleb's voice was serious as he worked on his ice cream. "She said you won, that the mean people who lied about you have to say sorry." "That's right, buddy." "Does that mean everything's okay now? No more people being mean?" Mason thought about how to answer that honestly. "It means this particular problem is solved, but there will always be challenges, always be people who don't agree with the choices I make. The important thing is that we faced something hard together, and we made it through." Caleb nodded, processing this with the gravity of childhood. "I'm proud of you, Daddy. You helped people even when it was scary." Mason felt tears prick his eyes. "I'm proud of you too, buddy. You've been so brave through all of this. That's what family does, right? We're brave together." "Yeah." Mason pulled his son into a hug. "That's exactly what family does." 3 months later, Mason stood in front of the board again for his 6-month review. This time, the presentation wasn't about promises. It was about results. 237 complaints processed. Average resolution time reduced from 6 weeks to 9 days. Employee satisfaction scores up 12%. Legal settlements down 68%. Turnover in high-risk departments reduced by 23%. But more than the numbers, Mason showed them the stories. People who'd filed complaints and actually got help. Managers who'd been coached through problematic behaviors and genuinely improved. Situations that had been handled fairly, transparently, with dignity for everyone involved. "The ethics program is working," Mason concluded. "Not perfectly. We still make mistakes, we still face challenges, we're still learning. But we're building something real. A culture where accountability isn't scary, where people can come to work without fear, where doing the right thing is expected rather than exceptional." Gerald Hutchinson, who'd been the hardest sell 6 months ago, actually nodded in approval. "I'll admit I was skeptical, but these results speak for themselves. I move that we make the ethics program permanent and approve Director Reed's budget request for expansion." The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, Victoria caught Mason in the hallway. "You know what this means, right?" "What?" "You're stuck with me now. Permanent position, no more provisional status, fully integrated into company leadership." Victoria's smile was genuine. "How does it feel to go from invisible to indispensable in less than a year?" Mason thought about the question seriously. A year ago, he'd been just a driver, grinding through shifts and trying to keep his son's world stable. Now, he was Director Reed, transforming company culture, making decisions that affected thousands of people. The scope of change was dizzying. "It feels like I'm finally doing work that matters," he said honestly. "Like maybe everything I went through, the false accusations, the suspension, the public scrutiny, maybe it was worth it if it means other people don't have to suffer the same way." "That's exactly the right answer." Victoria extended her hand. "Thank you, Mason, for taking the risk, for doing the work, for being exactly who you are. You've changed this company more than you know." They shook hands, professional and appropriate, 2 people who'd survived a crucible together and built something meaningful from the wreckage. That evening, Mason arrived home to find Mrs. Patterson waiting outside his door with Caleb, both of them looking excited about something. "What's going on?" Mason asked, immediately on alert for problems. "Open the door, honey." Mrs. Patterson was practically vibrating. "You have a delivery." Mason unlocked his apartment and stepped inside to find his living room transformed. A new couch. A real one, not the sagging thrift store model he'd been making do with. A proper desk instead of his folding table. Bookshelves already assembled and waiting to be filled. And on the coffee table, an envelope with his name on it. He opened it with shaking hands and found a note in Victoria's handwriting. "Your old furniture was depressing. This is not a gift, it's a business expense. Directors should have home offices that don't make their assistants weep. Consider it your 1-year work-from-home upgrade. You've earned it." VH attached was a substantial gift card to a bookstore with a post-it note that said, "For Caleb, keep reading together." Mason stood in his transformed living room, surrounded by evidence that someone had cared enough to notice what he needed to make his life easier without making it weird or uncomfortable. The furniture was nice but not extravagant, practical rather than showy, exactly what he would have chosen if he'd had the budget. "Do you like it, Daddy?" Caleb was bouncing with excitement. "Mrs. Patterson let the delivery people in while we were at school. And look," he pointed to the new bookshelves. "Now we can organize all our dinosaur books properly." "Yeah, buddy, I like it a lot." Mason pulled his son close, overwhelmed by gratitude and exhaustion and relief. "Come on, let's christen these bookshelves. Where do we start?" They spent the evening organizing books, and Mason felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for as long as he could remember. Stability. Not the fragile, temporary kind that could be destroyed by one unexpected expense or one false rumor. Real stability, built on work that mattered, relationships that were genuine, a future that looked possible. 2 years later, Mason stood on the stage at a national conference on workplace ethics, sharing Apex's story with hundreds of HR professionals and business leaders. He talked about what it meant to build accountability systems that actually worked, about the importance of protecting whistleblowers, about why ethics programs needed to be led by people who understood what it cost when systems failed. The audience asked smart questions, and Mason answered with the confidence of someone who'd learned his job by doing it, who'd made mistakes and learned from them, who'd helped hundreds of people navigate workplace conflicts and come out better on the other side. After his presentation, a young woman approached him during the break. "Director Reed, I work for a company with a really toxic culture, and I've been trying to convince my CEO to implement something like what you built at Apex. Do you have any advice?" Mason thought about that night 2 years ago, about being suspended and terrified and convinced his life was over, about Victoria fighting for him when it would have been easier to stay silent, about choosing to help someone even when it was dangerous, and building something meaningful from the wreckage that followed. "My advice is to find someone who's been hurt by the current system," he said, "not someone who theorizes about problems, but someone who's actually lived them. Give them authority to make changes, support them when things get hard, and trust them to care about people more than politics. That's how you build something real." What if they're not qualified in traditional ways? Traditional qualifications gave us traditional results, which is to say, inadequate ones. Mason smiled. Sometimes the best person for the job is someone who understands why the job matters, not someone who spent 20 years learning how to manage perception. Take the risk on the right person, even if they don't look like what you expected. That night, Mason video called Caleb from his hotel room. His son was 8 now, reading at a 5th grade level, obsessed with both dinosaurs and space exploration. He'd grown so much, and Mason had been there for most of it. School plays and science fairs and soccer games, present in ways his own father never had been. "How's the conference, Dad?" Caleb asked, already shortening Daddy to Dad with the growing independence of 2nd grade. "Good. Lots of talking about how to make workplaces better." "Did you tell them about how you're basically a superhero?" Mason laughed. "I'm not a superhero, buddy. I'm just a guy trying to do right by people." "That's what superheroes are." Caleb's logic was unassailable. "They help people. You help people. Therefore, superhero. It's math." "When did you get so smart?" "I told you before, I've always been smart. You're just old and slow to notice." "I'm 33. "Exactly. Ancient." They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important and everything that mattered. Caleb's school project on Mars rovers, Mrs. Patterson's new kitten, the camping trip they were planning for summer. Normal life, boring and beautiful and hard-won. After hanging up, Mason stood at his hotel window looking out at a city he didn't know, thinking about how far he'd come from that driver who'd just been trying to provide stability for his son. He'd built something that mattered, changed lives, proved that one person could actually make a difference if they cared enough to try. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Heard your presentation went well. Proud of you, as always. See you Monday. We've got 12 new cases that came in while you were gone." "Welcome back." Mason smiled and sent back a thumbs up. 12 new cases meant 12 people who thought someone might actually help them. 12 chances to prove that the system worked. 12 opportunities to make Apex a little bit better than it was yesterday. The work never ended. There would always be new complaints, new challenges, new ways that people could hurt each other in professional settings. But now there was also a system to address those harms, people trained to investigate fairly, and a culture slowly shifting toward accountability. Mason packed his presentation materials and checked the time. Early flight tomorrow, then straight to the office, then pick up Caleb from school, then homework and dinner and bedtime stories. The routine of a life that was normal and stable and his. He thought about that scared driver sitting in a parking garage 2 years ago, about to make a choice that would change everything. About staying when leaving would have been safer. About helping when helping was dangerous. If he could go back and talk to that version of himself, terrified and uncertain, what would he say? Probably just, "You're stronger than you know, and the hard thing is worth doing. Trust yourself, protect your kid, and don't back down when you're right. It's going to hurt, but you're going to make it, and you're going to help a lot of people along the way." Mason turned off the lights and climbed into the hotel bed, exhausted and content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new chances to prove that integrity wasn't just idealism. It was practical, necessary, and powerful. But tonight, he'd rest in the knowledge that he'd done something impossible. He'd survived being falsely accused, he'd built an ethics program from nothing, he'd transformed a company's culture, and he'd proven that one person caring deeply could change everything. Not bad for a single dad who'd just been trying to help someone get home safe. Not bad at all.